Tonight we are diving into the fascinating world of Greek mythology. A world filled with ancient forces, powerful beings, and stories that shape the imagination of entire civilizations. As always, take a moment to settle in, get comfortable, and let your minds slow down as we begin. In the beginning there was no Olympus, no earth, no sea, no sky. There was only chaos. And chaos was not the kind of chaos modern tongues describe. Not disorder, not confusion, not frenzy. It was something far older than language itself. Something that cannot truly be defined. Chaos was a vast yawning void. A gaping nothingness without form or direction. It did not think. It did not move. It did not feel. It was not evil, nor good, nor even neutral. It simply existed. And from that ancient nothingness came the first quiet stirrings of existence. The very first beginning of creation. From chaos emerged Gaia, the earth herself. Vast, steady, and unshaking. She became the ground beneath everything. The first solid presence in a universe that had known only emptiness. Then came Tartarus, the deep abyss beneath the earth. Dark, heavy, and dreadful. A place so vast it seemed to swallow all light. And then came Eros. Not just love as we understand it, but something far greater. The force of desire. The pull that binds all things together. The unseen power that would shape everything that followed. These were not gods as we imagine them. Not yet. But raw elemental truths given form. Then came Nyx, the night. Wrapped in a darkness so deep that even chaos seemed to recoil from it. She moved through the void like a living shadow. Silent. And eternal. Beside her came Erebus. The darkness of the underworld. A presence that settled into that early silence. From the union of night and darkness came ether. The pure upper air that only the gods would one day breathe. And Hemera. The day. Who from the beginning was destined to chase away the night. Again and again. Without end. And so the cycle of night and day began. Not through science. Not through reason. But through myth. Through a family of unseen forces shaping the sky with every passing moment. Gaia the earth did not remain still. She was patient, fertile, and full of life. And from her own being she brought forth Uranus. The sky. Vast and filled with stars. He was both her son and her companion. And when he stretched himself across her, forming a great arch above the world, existence took its first true shape. A wide endless earth below, and a great dome of sky above. Gaia also brought forth the mountains, rising tall and wild across her surface. And Pontus, the sea, restless, powerful, and moving with a will of its own long before any creature touched its waters. Together earth and sky became the first great pair. And from their union came the Titans. The first generation of powerful beings who would one day rule the cosmos. Long before Zeus and his kind rose to power, there were 12 Titans in all. 6 sons and 6 daughters. Each vast and elemental in their own way. Oceanus, the great encircling river. Hyperion, the lord of light. Ceus, the seeker of knowledge. Crius, tied to the constellations. Iapetus, the ancestor of mankind. And Cronus, the youngest. Quiet, watchful, and cunning. Among the daughters were Thea, radiant and bright, mother of the sun and moon. Rhea, who would become the mother of gods. Themis, embodiment of divine law. Mnemosyne, keeper of memory. Phoebe, glowing with gentle light. And Tethys, the nourishing force of the waters. But Gaia was not finished. Her creations did not end with the Titans. She brought forth beings far more terrifying. Creatures of immense strength and strange form. First came the Cyclopes, Brontes, Steripes, and Argesh, each with a single eye blazing like a forge in the center of their forehead. They were powerful, fearless, and masters of creation, the future makers of thunder and lightning. Then came the Centimanes, the 100-handed ones, each enormous and terrifying, with 50 heads and 100 arms. Their strength so great it could shake the very foundations of the world. But when Uranus looked upon these monstrous children, he did not see power. He saw danger. Fear took hold of him. Ashamed and terrified of what they might become, he forced them back into Gaia's womb, pushing them deep within the earth, and sealing them away beneath stone and darkness. And Gaia suffered. The earth, once full of life, began to groan under the weight of her imprisoned children. Every moment became pain. Every breath carried the burden of what had been taken from her. And in that pain something began to change. Something quiet. Something patient. Gaia began to plan. But that is a story for another time. For now, remember this. In the oldest age, before law or justice, before sword or plow, the world was shaped not by hands, but by force, by creation, and by sorrow. Chaos gave rise to existence. But it was Gaia, the Great Mother, who gave it a place to stand. The union of Gaia and Uranus, earth and sky, became the first great bond of the cosmos. It was not a marriage of ceremony or witnesses, but one born from necessity and nature itself. The sky stretched endlessly above the earth, wrapping around her, pressing close night after night, covering her beneath a vast body filled with stars. From this union came the Titans and many other powerful beings, but along with creation came something else, something heavier, something darker. A quiet and growing sorrow began to take root. For Uranus, though vast and mighty, was not a loving father. He was proud, and beneath that pride lay fear. When he looked upon the children Gaia bore, especially the monstrous ones, he did not see strength or wonder. He saw danger. He saw a future where his own power might be challenged. The Cyclopes with their burning single eyes, and the Centimanes with their 100 arms and countless heads, filled him not with awe, but with dread. And so, in a moment of cruel judgment, he forced them back into Gaia's womb, pushing them deep into the earth itself, sealing them away where no light could reach and no voice could escape. Gaia suffered. Her body, which had once been a source of life, became a prison. She groaned beneath the weight of her children, trapped within her once more. It was not only the pain of holding them again, but the betrayal of Uranus, who should have stood beside her, who should have cared for their children as she did. Night after night Uranus returned, stretching himself across her, pressing the heavens down upon the earth, unmoved by her suffering, untouched by her grief. And slowly, that pain began to change into something else. Gaia could endure no longer. From her own being, she shaped a weapon. Not of metal, for metal had not yet been born into the world, but of hard, unbreakable stone. A great sickle of flint, jagged and sharp, formed with purpose and quiet rage. Then she called upon her Titan sons, the first and strongest of her children, and revealed her suffering to them. "Your father has wronged me," she said. "He has imprisoned your brothers. He has silenced the very womb that gave you life. Who among you will stand with me?" One by one, they turned away. Fear held them back. The power of Uranus was too great, too overwhelming. None dared rise against him. None except one. Cronus, the youngest, watched and listened. He was patient, thoughtful, and unlike his brothers, he did not turn away from fear. He stepped forward. "I will do it," he said. "Give me the blade." And so Gaia placed the sickle into his hands. She waited for the moment she knew would come, as it always did. Uranus descended once more, covering the earth in darkness, stretching himself across her as he had done countless times before. But this time, something was different. From the shadows, Cronus rose. There was no hesitation. No second thought. With steady hands he struck. The sickle cut deep. The sky itself seemed to tremble as Uranus cried out, a sound that echoed across existence. His power was broken, severed in a single, decisive moment. Cronus cast what he had taken from his father into the sea. And where it fell, the waters churned and frothed, rising in pale foam against the waves. From that foam, something new emerged. A figure of breathtaking beauty, both gentle and terrifying, carrying within her the power to inspire love and destruction alike. Aphrodite was born. She stepped upon the shores of Cyprus, radiant and calm, untouched by the violence that had given her life. And though she appeared serene, her presence would one day bring kings to their knees and kingdoms to ruin. But Gaia's vengeance did not end there. Where the blood of Uranus touched the earth, new beings rose. The Furies, dark and relentless, destined to punish those who broke sacred bonds. The giants, powerful and defiant, who would one day challenge the gods themselves. And the Melee, nymphs of the ash trees, guardians of the ancient and untamed world. Uranus, wounded and overthrown, faded into the distant heavens, leaving the world behind. But before he was gone, he spoke a final warning. A curse that would echo through time. "As I was cast down by my own son, so too shall he be cast down by his own." It was not a curse born in that moment. It was a truth that had already begun to take shape, a truth Gaia herself had whispered into the fabric of the world. And Cronus heard it. He took the throne of the cosmos, wrapping himself in power. Yet even as he claimed it, fear took hold within him. The same fear that had once lived in his father now began to grow inside him. Thus ended the reign of Uranus, the first ruler of all existence. And thus began the age of the Titans. But even as this new era began, something unseen was already moving beneath the surface of time. With Uranus gone, the sky no longer pressed so heavily upon the earth. The world seemed to breathe for the first time. The Titans stood free, no longer bound by their father's rule. And among them, Cronus rose above all others. He was not like Uranus, not openly cruel or driven by blind force. He ruled with caution, with thought, with a mind that was always watching. But beneath that calm surface, there was always something else. A quiet, growing fear that never truly left him. And that fear would one day shape the fate of gods and men alike. The sickle that Cronus had used to bring down his father did not remain in sight. It was hidden away, either buried deep within the earth or cast far into the sea. Its blade was no longer seen, yet its memory remained, like a silent mark of what had been done, a secret that could never truly be erased. Cronus had freed his mother from her suffering and released his siblings from their prison. He had done what none of them dared to do. And yet, from the very moment he claimed the throne of the cosmos, his victory brought him no peace. The words of his father did not fade. They lived within him, echoing again and again, like a second heartbeat that could not be silenced. The warning was clear. As he had overthrown his father, so too would he one day be overthrown by his own child. That thought followed him constantly. It settled into his mind, shaping every decision, every moment of his rule. And so, as all kings must, Cronus took a wife. He chose Rhea, his sister, a Titaness of quiet strength and deep understanding. She was gentle where he was guarded, wise where he was uncertain. She stood beside him not only as queen, but as a steady presence in a world that was still finding its shape. Yet her name, though spoken with respect, would one day be remembered with sorrow. Together, they ruled during what later generations would call the Golden Age. It was a time unlike any that followed. Mortals, newly brought into existence, lived without suffering. There was no war, no hunger, no harsh winter to endure. The earth gave freely, offering its fruits without effort or labor. Life moved in quiet harmony, untouched by fear or pain. There were no armies, no walls built for protection, no temples raised in desperation. Justice existed without being enforced, moving silently among humankind. No one feared their neighbor, and no door needed to be closed. It was a peaceful world, simple and whole. But peace, as it always does, could not last forever. In time, Rhea began to bear children. And with each birth, the fear within Cronus returned. The moment each child was placed into his hands, he did not hesitate. First came Hestia, then Demeter, then Hera, then Hades, and then Poseidon. One by one, he swallowed them. There were no cries left behind, no cradle left empty, no sign that they had ever been there. They simply vanished, hidden within their father's body, like seeds buried deep in the cold of winter. Cronus told himself it was necessary. He believed he had no choice. He would not suffer the same fate as Uranus. The throne had to be protected, no matter the cost. Rhea could do nothing to stop him. She was strong, but not strong enough to stand against the king of the cosmos. She wept, but her sorrow changed nothing. 5 times she gave birth, and 5 times her children were taken from her. But when she carried her 6th child, something within her changed. This time, she would not allow the same fate to repeat. When the moment came, she did not go to Cronus. Instead, she fled in secret to the island of Crete, a place of mountains and hidden caves, where the earth itself seemed to guard its secrets. There, far from the reach of Cronus, surrounded by nymphs and shepherds, she gave birth to her youngest son, Zeus. And from the very first moment, there was something different about him. His cry carried through the air with a force that seemed to shake the trees. His eyes opened as if he already understood the world around him. And when he grasped his mother's hand, there was a strength in him that felt larger than life, as if fate itself had taken hold. Rhea knew then that this child was not like the others. To protect him, she formed a plan. She wrapped a stone in cloth, shaping it to resemble a newborn, and brought it to Cronus with careful hands. Blinded by fear and habit, Cronus did not question it. He took the bundle and swallowed it whole, believing once again that he had escaped his fate. But this time, he had been deceived. Hidden deep within the caves beneath Mount Ida, Zeus was raised in secret. Warriors known as the Curetes stood guard over him, clashing their shields and stamping their feet to drown out the sound of his cries, so that no whisper of his existence would reach Cronus. He was fed by the divine goat Amalthea, whose milk nourished him and gave him strength beyond any mortal or god. From her broken horn came the cornucopia, a symbol of endless abundance, a sign that even in hiding, something greater was growing. When Amalthea died, Zeus honored her, placing her among the stars, so that her memory would remain in the sky he would one day rule. And as the years passed, Zeus grew. Not just in strength, but in purpose. Because he had not been born for a quiet life among the mountains. He had not been hidden away to remain unseen. Within him lived the promise of change, the weight of prophecy, and the beginning of a storm that would one day shake the entire world. For now, however, the reign of Cronus continued. The sky remained clear. The earth remained fertile. The Titans ruled from their thrones, unaware of what was coming. But deep within Cronus, the children he had swallowed still existed, waiting in silence. And far away, hidden from his sight, a child was growing, watching, and preparing. The winds had not yet begun to rise. But the storm was already on its way. The blood that flowed through Zeus was not ordinary. It carried within it the weight of prophecy, something ancient and unavoidable. And deep within his bones rested the quiet certainty of rebellion, a destiny that had been set long before he was born. As Zeus grew into his strength, something else began to awaken. Gaia, the great mother, stirred once more. She had not forgotten. She remembered the betrayal of Cronus. She remembered the suffering of her children, the Cyclopes and the 100-handed ones, still chained in darkness deep within Tartarus. The pain that had begun in the age of Uranus had never truly ended. It had only been waiting. Her vengeance was not finished. It had simply been delayed. With a voice as old as the earth itself, she reached out to Zeus. Not in open speech, but in quiet whispers that came to him in dreams. And when he was awake, it was as if unseen hands guided his steps, leading him toward what had to be done. The time had come. Gaia led him first to Metis, the Titaness of wisdom, whose mind was sharp and whose vision stretched beyond the present into what was yet to come. She understood the nature of power, and more importantly, how to overcome it. With her guidance, Zeus began to form a plan. To challenge Cronus was not a matter of strength alone. Cronus was not just a king, he was a force tied to time itself, to the order of the cosmos. To defeat him would require more than power. It would require patience, intelligence, and careful deception. So Zeus returned, not as a challenger, but in disguise. He entered the presence of his father unseen for what he truly was, carrying with him a plan crafted by Metis. He offered Cronus a drink, a mixture hidden within wine, sweet and heavy, masking its true purpose. Cronus, confident in his power, accepted without suspicion. But as the drink settled within him, something began to change. A deep unrest stirred in his body. His strength faltered. And then, with a violent shudder, he was forced to release what he had taken so long ago. One by one, the children he had swallowed were freed. They did not return as helpless infants. They emerged fully formed, radiant and powerful, carrying within them the strength of gods. First came Hestia, calm and steady, the spirit of the hearth. Then Demeter, giver of life and harvest. Then Hera, proud and sharp, her gaze unyielding. Then Hades, dark and silent, lord of what lay beneath. And finally Poseidon, fierce and restless, master of the sea. Together, for the first time, the 6 siblings stood united. They looked upon the world that had been denied to them. And they looked upon the throne that had imprisoned them. They did not forget. But Cronus was not alone. The Titans gathered around him, answering his call. His brothers and sisters rose once more, taking their place beside him. They gathered upon Mount Othrys, the ancient seat of their power. Only Oceanus remained apart, choosing not to take part in the coming conflict. Whether it was wisdom or weariness, none could say. But the others prepared for war. And so began the great conflict that would be remembered for all time as the Titanomachy. A war between the old world and the new. Between the Titans and the Olympians. For 10 long years, the battle raged without rest. The sky darkened with storm and fire. Thunder shook the heavens. Lightning split the clouds. The earth trembled beneath the weight of their fury. Mountains cracked. Seas rose in towering waves that swallowed islands whole. Volcanoes burned, spilling fire into the air. The winds howled across the world like living creatures. Below them, the world, still young and untouched, could only endure as its rulers tore it apart in their struggle for power. The Titans held Mount Othrys, strong and ancient, while Zeus and his siblings made their stand upon Mount Olympus, a place that had not yet been marked by war. The conflict seemed endless. Neither side could claim victory. Each battle ended only for another to begin. But Gaia, who had watched from the beginning, understood what was missing. The balance could not be broken without what had been buried. She spoke to Zeus once more. If he wished to win, he had to go deeper than any of them had gone before. He had to descend into Tartarus and free the beings that had long been imprisoned. The Cyclopes. And the Centaurs. Those whom Cronus had kept chained in darkness out of fear. Zeus did not hesitate. With his siblings beside him, he descended into the depths, into the dark place beneath all things. There, he broke the chains that had held them for ages. And the moment they were freed, the balance began to shift. The Cyclopes, grateful for their freedom, offered Zeus gifts of immense power. They forged for him the thunderbolt, a weapon that carried the force of the sky itself. To Poseidon, they gave the trident, with which he could command the oceans. And to Hades, they gave the helm of darkness, a gift that allowed him to move unseen, even among gods. The Centaurs joined the battle as well. Creatures of overwhelming strength, with 100 hands each, they hurled mountains as if they were stones. Their fury shook the foundations of the world. With these new allies, the tide of war began to turn. The Olympians pressed forward with a force the Titans could no longer match. Cronus fought until the end, refusing to yield. But prophecy does not bend. It does not hesitate. It unfolds exactly as it must. One by one, the Titans fell. They were driven from their strongholds, cast down from the heights of the world. Zeus did not destroy them. Instead, he did what had been done before. He imprisoned them. Deep within Tartarus they were thrown, bound in unbreakable chains, sealed behind great gates of bronze that would never weaken or decay. The Centaurs stood guard, their strength ensuring that no Titan would ever escape. Only a few were spared this fate. Prometheus and Epimetheus, who had chosen to stand with the gods. And Themis, who had seen the coming order and accepted it. And so, the age of the Titans came to an end. The war was over. But the world had been forever changed. So the reign of the Titans came to its end. The storms faded. The fires dimmed. And slowly, the sky cleared once more. The world, broken and scarred by years of war, began to heal. Mountains settled, seas grew calm, and the earth, though wounded, endured. The throne of the cosmos passed to Zeus, not because he was the eldest, not by right of birth, but because he had proven himself through strength, through wisdom, and through the fulfillment of fate itself. And yet, even as he rose to power, something followed him. The words of Cronus did not vanish. They lingered behind him like the echo of a distant voice, quiet but impossible to ignore. A reminder that power, once taken, can never be held without vigilance. That no ruler, whether god or mortal, sits upon a throne forever without fear. With the war ended, the world fell into a deep and uneasy silence. The victor stood upon the remains of what had been. The Titans, once rulers of all existence, were now bound in the depths of Tartarus, their voices swallowed by a darkness so deep that no sound could ever return. The old order had been broken. But with victory came a new challenge, one far more difficult than war. To rule. Conquest could be achieved with force and fury. But ruling required something different. It required balance, judgment, and patience. The world was vast, untamed, filled with forces still unknown. It could not be controlled by one alone. Zeus stood at the center of this new age. Though he had not been the firstborn, he had proven himself above all others. He was the strongest, the most decisive, the one who had acted when action was needed. But the laws of the cosmos were older than him, older than any god. And they did not allow one ruler to claim everything. Zeus was not alone. He had two brothers who had fought beside him, who had suffered, endured, and earned their place just as he had. Poseidon, whose power could shake the seas and stir the oceans into fury. And Hades, who had moved unseen through war and darkness, calm and unyielding. They too had bled for victory. They too had faced the storm. The world could not belong to Zeus alone. If it did, then the seeds of another war would begin to grow, this time not between generations, but between brothers. And so, they chose another path. They would divide the world. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades gathered together and cast lots, leaving the decision not to argument or force, but to fate itself. This was no simple act. It was sacred. Guided by the same unseen power that had shaped all things from the beginning. They cast their lots and waited. When the outcome was decided, the cosmos was divided into three great realms. To Zeus fell the sky. The vast heavens above, the open air between the highest peaks and the furthest stars. He became the lord of thunder and rain, master of storms and clouds, and the undisputed king of Olympus. His voice would be heard in the crash of thunder. His anger would flash across the sky as lightning. And the eagle, soaring higher than any creature, became his symbol. To Poseidon fell the sea. A realm deep, restless, and filled with mystery. He claimed not only the great oceans, but every river, every spring, every drop of water that flowed across the earth. With his trident, he could shatter stone, stir the tides, and command the waves to rise or fall. Beneath the surface, he built his kingdom, a palace of coral and gold, hidden in the depths. There, he ruled not only over the waters, but over creatures ancient and powerful, sea serpents, vast beasts, and things whose names were never spoken. To Hades fell the underworld, the realm beneath all others, where the souls of the dead would journey. It was not a gift many would have chosen, but Hades accepted it without complaint. He ruled with quiet authority, neither cruel nor kind but just. His kingdom lay hidden from the light of the sun, deep beneath the earth. There, he became the guardian of the dead, the judge of souls, and the keeper of all that was buried. Not only spirits, but treasures as well. Gems, metals, and secrets lost to time itself. Though mortals feared his name, speaking it only in whispers, Hades was unwavering. It was said that he never broke the laws he upheld, never allowed the balance between life and death to falter. The earth itself remained untouched. Gaia's domain was not claimed by any one god. The mountains, the forests, the plains, all remained a shared realm. A place where gods could walk among mortals, and where mortals, for a brief moment, might witness the divine. It was a land of life, of change, of endless possibility. But it was also a place where ambition could grow, and where fate would continue its quiet work, shaping the future in ways none could fully see. And so, the world found its order. Sky above, sea below, and the underworld hidden beneath it all. The age of the gods had truly begun. The three brothers, now rulers of their own domains, made a vow among themselves. They would not raise their hands against one another. For they had seen what war could do. They had watched the world break beneath it. And they knew that if they turned against each other, the damage would be far greater than anything that had come before. And so they swore peace. Each returned to his own realm, building a throne, gathering followers, shaping the order of the world according to his will. High above the clouds, upon Mount Olympus, Zeus called the gods to gather. There, beside him, stood his sisters. Hera, proud and unyielding, her presence cold and sharp like winter itself. Demeter, gentle yet powerful, whose very steps awakened life in the earth, bringing the promise of growth and renewal. And Hestia, quiet and steady, whose flame burned in every home, unseen yet always present. And they were not alone. Others came as well, both old and new, drawn to this rising power at the peak of the world. Athena arrived, born not in the usual way, but from wisdom and war, carrying both thought and strength within her. Apollo came, bright and golden, his sight reaching far beyond what others could see. Artemis followed, silent and swift, moving with the quiet certainty of the wild. Ares stood among them, fierce and blood-stained, carrying the raw force of war itself. Hermes came as well, quick in both body and mind, a messenger and a trickster, always in motion. Hephaestus, though marked by his limp, brought unmatched skill, a master of fire and craft. And Aphrodite, whose beauty could bend hearts and bring even the strongest to their knees, completed the gathering, her presence as dangerous as it was captivating. Together, they formed something new. A court unlike any that had existed before. This was the beginning of the age of Olympus. Yet even as the thrones were set and the world was divided, peace remained uncertain. For the gods, despite their power, were not free from emotion. Pride, desire, anger, jealousy, all lived within them. And these would shape the world as much as their strength ever could. And below them, mortals had begun to rise. Their lives would be short, their struggles many, but their stories would intertwine with those of the gods, bringing new conflicts, new victories, and new sorrow. The heavens had been claimed. But ruling was never simple. And peace, especially among gods, was never permanent. As time passed and the scars of war began to fade, Mount Olympus became more than a stronghold. It became the heart of divine power, a shining court set above the world. The Titans had once ruled from Mount Othrys, a place ancient and harsh, wrapped in storm and shadow. But Olympus stood higher still. Its peak touched the clouds, its presence wrapped in myth. It was not just a mountain, but a boundary between worlds, where the realm of mortals ended and the realm of gods began. Here, Zeus gathered the new pantheon, shaping a kingdom that did not resemble anything built by human hands. There were no roads leading to its gates. No guards standing watch. No walls to defend it. The gods did not need such things. The air itself was their barrier, a height no mortal could reach, a space where only the divine could exist. Olympus was untouched by storm, untouched by decay. No snow fell upon it, no rain washed its halls. It existed beyond such changes. Its halls were formed of marble and cloud. Light moved freely through them. The ceilings shimmered with starlight, and the vast corridors stretched endlessly, open and alive, as if the wind itself wandered through them. Here, the gods did not appear as distant signs or shadows. They stood in their true forms, radiant, powerful, and more alive than anything in the world below. At the highest point of Olympus sat Zeus, king of gods and men. He sat upon a throne of thunder, his presence commanding yet controlled. His power was unmatched, but it was not strength alone that defined him. It was the experience of war, the understanding of balance, and the knowledge that power must be held carefully. His voice carried like distant thunder across the sky. His gaze reached far beyond the present, seeing what others could not. And in his hand he held the thunderbolt, a weapon forged by the Cyclopes, a symbol of judgment that struck swift and without hesitation. Yet even Zeus did not stand alone. Around him were the others, each one holding a place within this new order. Hera sat beside him, not simply as his wife, but as queen. She was the goddess of marriage, of royal power, and of childbirth. But beneath that role was something deeper. A pride that could not be bent, and a memory that never forgot. She carried within her a quiet fury, one that would one day shape the fate of both gods and mortals. Her position was not given lightly. It had been earned, forged through struggle, and bound by the sacred laws of Olympus. Demeter stood apart in her own way. She was the goddess of the earth's bounty, of growth and harvest. Wherever she walked, life followed. Seeds awakened, and the land softened under her presence. She did not remain only in Olympus. Much of her time was spent among mortals, watching over fields, guiding those who depended on the land for survival. She was calm, older than many, and though she spoke less than others, her power was undeniable. And then there was Hestia, the firstborn of Cronus and Rhea, and the last to be freed from his grasp. She did not seek power, nor glory, nor recognition. Instead, she chose something quieter. She became the guardian of the hearth, the flame that burned at the center of every home. While others ruled the skies, the seas, or the depths, Hestia remained steady and constant, her presence felt wherever warmth and life endured. She asked for little, but without her, nothing could truly be called home. Hestia asked for nothing. No temples built in her name, no grand stories told in her honor, no wars fought or lovers taken. While the other gods shaped the world through power and ambition, she chose something quieter. She tended the eternal flame at the heart of Olympus, a fire that never went out. It burned steadily, untouched by time, a symbol of warmth, of home, of life itself. And from that flame, her presence spread across the world. In every home where a fire was lit, in every hearth where warmth gathered people together, Hestia was there. Her power was gentle, almost unseen, yet constant. As long as a flame burned, she endured. And so, while others were feared or worshipped, Hestia was something else entirely. She was simply present. As time moved forward, a new generation of gods began to rise. Some were born upon Olympus itself, while others came into existence through strange and unexpected means, shaped by fate and necessity rather than simple birth. Among them, Athena stood first. Her birth was unlike any other. Zeus, wary of prophecy and ever cautious of being overthrown as his father had been, learned that Metis, the Titaness of wisdom, would bear a child greater than him. Fear took hold of him, the same fear that had once ruled Cronus. And so, to prevent that future, Zeus swallowed Metis. He believed the danger had passed. But wisdom cannot be so easily silenced. Metis did not fade. She remained within him, alive and thinking, shaping thoughts, forging knowledge in silence. Until one day, that hidden presence could no longer remain contained. A great pain seized Zeus. It grew within him, unbearable and sharp, as if something was forcing its way into existence. And then, with a sudden and violent burst, Athena emerged. She sprang from his head, fully grown, clad in armor, a spear already in her hand. Her eyes were clear, focused, and sharp, carrying a mind as precise as any weapon. She became the goddess of wisdom, of strategy, and of just war. Unlike Ares, who thrived on chaos, Athena stood for order, for thought, for battles won not only by strength, but by understanding. She had no patience for foolishness, no interest in petty desires. She stood apart, guided by reason. After her came the twins, Apollo and Artemis. They were born to Leto, a Titaness who wandered the world in search of refuge. For Hera's anger was relentless, and no land dared offer her shelter. For a long time, she wandered, weary and alone, carrying her children with nowhere to go. At last, the floating island of Delos took pity on her. A place not fixed to the earth, it was free from Hera's reach. There, at last, she found rest. And there, she gave birth. Apollo was radiant, bright as the sun itself. He became the god of light, of prophecy, of music, and of healing. His presence brought clarity, knowledge, and beauty into the world. His sister, Artemis, was his opposite in many ways. Silent, swift, and distant, she moved through the wilderness like a shadow. She became the goddess of the hunt, of wild nature, and of the moon. Together, they represented balance. Light and darkness, civilization and wilderness, reason and instinct. With them, a new generation of gods took shape, more connected to the mortal world, more involved in its unfolding stories. Then came Ares, the god of war in its most brutal form. He was the son of Zeus and Hera, yet he was loved by neither. He embodied strength without control, rage without purpose. Where he walked, destruction followed. Though feared, he was rarely honored. For war, though powerful, is not always respected. Even among the gods, Ares was often overshadowed by those who wielded wisdom rather than fury. His opposite stood in Hephaestus, the god of fire and the forge, master of creation. His origins were uncertain. Some said Hera bore him alone, while others claimed he had been cast from Olympus by Zeus himself. But regardless of how he came to be, he found his place not among beauty or pride, but in craft. In fire and metal, he created wonders. Armor that could not be broken, palaces of impossible design, and creations that moved as if alive. Though his body was marked by imperfection, his skill was unmatched. Among all the gods, he was one of the most necessary. Aphrodite stood apart from all of them. She had not been born in the way others were. She had risen from the sea itself, from the foam created by the fall of Uranus. When she stepped onto the shores of Cyprus, the world changed. She was beauty given form, desire made real. Where she went, love followed. But so did jealousy, obsession, and ruin. Even Zeus, king of the gods, could not fully control her. With a single glance, she could bind both gods and mortals alike. And though her smile was gentle, it always carried consequences. Then came Hermes, the messenger, the trickster, the one who moved between all worlds. The son of Zeus and the nymph Maia, he was restless from the very beginning. On the day he was born, he stole Apollo's cattle, hiding his tracks and covering his actions with cleverness. Even as a newborn, he was already playing games. But instead of punishment, he found his place. He became the messenger of the gods, the guide of souls, the patron of travelers and thieves alike. Wherever Hermes went, boundaries seemed to disappear. He moved freely between realms, between the living and the dead, between order and chaos. This was the court of Olympus. Not a gathering of perfect beings, but of forces. Powerful, flawed, and deeply human in their emotions. They argued, as siblings do. They formed alliances, took sides, loved, and betrayed. They interfered in the lives of mortals, shaping events for their own reasons. And above all, they ruled. From Olympus, they looked down upon the world, guiding it, changing it, sometimes helping, sometimes destroying. The age of the Titans had ended. And in its place began something new. An age filled with stories. Stories of gods who walked among men. Of heroes born from divine blood. Of choices, of struggles, of victories and tragedies that would echo through time. The world now had its rulers. But peace, as always, was fragile. And fate had not yet spoken its final word. For long before cities were built, before temples rose, before prayers were carved into stone, there were no humans upon the earth. The gods ruled alone. Their kingdoms vast. Their power unquestioned. The world beneath the gods was vast and untouched. It stretched out in endless green, filled with forests that had never been walked, mountains that stood in silence, and creatures that roamed without fear. The land was alive, rich and full of life, yet something was missing. There were no hands to shape the soil. No voices to rise beneath the night sky. No fire to break the darkness. The world existed, but it was empty of meaning. And it was Prometheus who first imagined something more. He was a titan, born of the old order, yet unlike many of his kind. He had not stood with Cronus, nor had he been cast into Tartarus with the others. During the Great War, he had chosen to side with Zeus. Not out of loyalty or devotion, but because he could see what was coming. Prometheus possessed the gift of foresight. He could see beyond the present, beyond the struggle, into the shape of what the world would become. He knew which side would rise, and he chose accordingly. His name itself meant forethought, and it defined him completely. He was the brother of Epimetheus, whose name meant afterthought. And the difference between them was clear in everything they did. Where Epimetheus acted first and reflected later, often too late, Prometheus thought carefully, always looking ahead. He questioned everything, even the decisions of Zeus himself. He did not accept power simply because it existed. He measured it, weighed it, and judged it. He stood between two worlds, between the Titans and the Olympians, between the past and the future. A being of reason in a universe ruled by emotion and force. And it was Prometheus who shaped mankind. Some say he formed them from clay, beside a riverbank, his hands shaping their bodies, his breath giving them life. Others say he made them in the image of the gods, upright and aware, gifted with thought and imagination. But however it happened, the first humans came into being. And they were weak. Their skin was soft. Their bodies slow. They had no claws, no fangs, no natural protection. They could not endure the cold, nor defend themselves against the beasts that roamed the earth. They stood beneath the open sky, exposed and fragile, shivering in the night, powerless against the world around them. Prometheus looked upon them and felt something rare among the gods. Pity. He saw their struggle, their vulnerability, and he believed they deserved more. So he went to Olympus. He stood before Zeus and asked for a gift to be given to mankind. Something to help them survive. Something to lift them above mere animals. But Zeus refused. He did not see promise in humans. He saw danger. He had only just claimed his throne. The memory of rebellion was still fresh. The thought of another rising force, even one as small as mankind, filled him with suspicion. Let them live, he said. But let them remain weak. Let them fear the gods and know their place. Fire, he declared, was not for them. Fire belonged to the gods. It lived in the hearth of Hestia, in the thunder of Zeus, in the forge of Hephaestus. It was power, and power was not meant for mortal hands. But Prometheus did not accept this. He believed the decision was unjust. And so he chose to act not openly, but in secret. He ascended to the heavens and went to the forge of Hephaestus. There, where divine fire burned endlessly, he took a single flame. He hid it within a hollow stalk and carried it down to the earth. And for the first time, fire belonged to mankind. It flickered beneath the night sky, small at first, then growing stronger. Smoke rose into the air. Light pushed back the darkness. And everything began to change. With fire came warmth, protection from the cold. With fire came cooking, making food easier to survive on. With fire came tools, metals shaped by heat, the beginning of craft and creation. With fire came language, knowledge, and the first steps towards civilization. Humanity, once silent and helpless, began to rise. But with fire came something else as well. Independence. Defiance. And Zeus did not fail to notice. When he discovered what Prometheus had done, his anger was swift and terrible. He would not allow such an act to go unpunished. But instead of striking Prometheus alone, he chose to punish mankind as well. He ordered the gods to create a gift that would carry within it a hidden curse. Hephaestus shaped her from clay, forming a woman of perfect beauty. Aphrodite gave her charm, a grace that could draw anyone near. Hermes gave her cunning, a quick and curious mind. Athena clothed her in shining garments. She was called Pandora, the one who was given all gifts. But along with her, she carried something else. A sealed jar. Within it were all the sorrows of the world. Disease, pain, suffering, madness, envy, and death itself, all contained within, waiting. Pandora was sent to Epimetheus. Despite all warnings, he welcomed her. He saw only her beauty, not the danger she carried. And in time, curiosity took hold. It was the final gift the gods had given her. The desire to know what was hidden. She opened the jar. And in that moment, everything changed. The evils of the world escaped. They spread across the earth like smoke released from a long-sealed fire. Suffering, once unknown, became part of human life. Hunger took root. War followed. Age began to weigh upon the body. The world, once simple and whole, became something far more difficult. Pandora, realizing what had happened, tried to close the jar. But it was too late. Everything had escaped. Everything except one thing. At the bottom of the jar remained hope. A small, flickering presence, left behind in the darkness. Some say it remained by accident. Others say it was always meant to stay. A single light, fragile but enduring, within a world that had been forever changed. But Prometheus's punishment had not yet come. For his defiance, for daring to challenge the will of Olympus, Zeus chose a punishment that would never end. He ordered that the Titan be taken to the edge of the world, to a place far from gods and men alike. Some say it was the Caucasus Mountains, others say it was a land so distant that its name has been lost to time. There, Prometheus was bound. Chains were fastened around him, not of iron or bronze, but of adamant, unbreakable, eternal. They held him against the stone, unable to move, unable to escape. And each day, his suffering began anew. An eagle descended from the sky, a creature sent by Zeus, or born from the ancient powers of the world itself. It came without mercy. It tore into him, feeding upon his liver. And when night fell, the wound did not remain. His body healed. The flesh returned. Only for the pain to begin again with the rising sun. He was immortal. And so, he could not die. The torment continued, day after day, year after year, far beyond what any mortal mind could endure. Empires would rise and fall, generations would pass, and still Prometheus remained, bound to the rock, suffering without end. Yet even in that endless punishment, he did not yield. He did not beg. He did not repent. For he knew something that even Zeus could not ignore. A truth that had not yet come to pass, but one that would shape the future of the gods themselves. He knew that Zeus, like those before him, would not rule forever. That one day, the king of the gods would fall. Not by war, not by rebellion, but through his own blood. It was this knowledge that protected Prometheus. Zeus could not destroy him, could not end his suffering, without first learning the secret he held. The name of the one who would bring about his downfall. And so Prometheus remained. Chained, but not defeated. Silent, but never broken. As the years passed, humans lit their fires beneath the night sky, telling stories of the Titan who had given them that gift, the one who had dared to stand against the gods. And while the gods ruled above, shaping the heavens and the seas, they were not alone in shaping the world. Below them, on the earth that drank the rain and felt the warmth of the sun, humanity lived its brief and fragile lives. They struggled. They learned. They built. They fell. Their lives were short, passing like sparks in the darkness when compared to the endless existence of the gods. And yet, those brief lives mattered. For it was the actions of mortals that filled the world with meaning, with beauty and with sorrow. The gods may have shaped the world, but it was humanity that lived within it. And those who came later, the poets and storytellers, would look back upon this long and changing history and see not a single mankind, but many different ages, each marked by the will of the gods, each shaped by blessing or punishment. It was Hesiod, a farmer and poet, who gave these ages their names, dividing the journey of humanity into 5 distinct eras: the Golden Age, the Silver Age, the Bronze Age, the Heroic Age, and the Iron Age, each one, in its own way, a reflection of change. In the beginning, there was the Golden Age, a time unlike any that followed. It existed during the reign of Cronus, before fear took hold, before the world was marked by war or hardship. In those days, humans lived as if they were gods themselves. They did not suffer. They did not grow old. They did not struggle. The earth provided everything they needed, without effort, without labor. Food grew freely. The seasons did not harm them. Life moved in perfect balance. There were no kings, no laws, no weapons. No need for protection, no need for power. There was no hunger, no sickness, no sorrow. And when their time came, they did not face pain. They simply drifted into death, as if falling asleep. Their spirits did not vanish. They remained, gentle and watchful, moving unseen through the world, guiding and protecting those who would come after. It was a time of harmony, and it would never return. For all things, no matter how perfect, must come to an end. With the fall of Cronus and the rise of Zeus, the Golden Age faded, and the Silver Age began. These humans were different. They were strong, and they lived long lives, but something within them was lacking. They spent many years as children, growing slowly, sheltered and unaware. And when they finally reached adulthood, they became arrogant and reckless. They did not respect the gods. They did not follow the laws that had been set before them. They built no temples. They offered no sacrifices. They lived as if they were above the order of the world. And for that, they were punished. Zeus struck them down. Their spirits did not rise to become protectors. They faded into the underworld, forgotten and without honor. They became a warning, a reflection of what happens when pride blinds those who forget their place. Then came the Bronze Age, a time shaped by war. These humans were not gentle. They were strong, hardened, and relentless. It was said that even their bodies were like bronze, unyielding and cold. Their homes were built of bronze. Their tools were bronze. Their weapons were bronze. Everything about them was shaped for conflict. They lived for battle, and they died by it. The world filled with the sound of war, with the clash of weapons and the fall of warriors. The land itself seemed to darken under the weight of their violence. They did not build great cities. They did not leave behind art or stories. They left behind only destruction. And when they were gone, they passed into the underworld without remembrance. Their age ended as it had existed, in violence. They were terrible to look upon, fierce and unyielding, yet they were not born from evil. They did not wage war out of hatred, nor did they seek destruction for its own sake. They simply lived within it. War was their rhythm, the steady beat that guided their lives, the clash of metal, the echo of marching steps, the constant pull toward battle. They built nothing that would last. No cities rose under their hands, no songs were sung in their honor, no statues carved their likeness into stone. Creation meant nothing to them. Only conflict mattered. And when they fell, they left behind no legacy. Only shattered weapons scattered across the earth. Fields once soaked in blood now left empty and silent. No names remembered, no stories carried forward. Even the gods turned away. There were no prayers for them. No mourning. No place of honor. They passed into the underworld as if they had never existed at all. Yet the path of mankind was not a straight descent into darkness. From the ashes of the Bronze Age, from smoke that still lingered over the world, something unexpected emerged. A brief and brilliant rise. The Heroic Age. It was not part of the fall, but a pause within it. A moment where the world seemed to remember what greatness could be. These were not ordinary men. They were born of two worlds. Of gods and mortals. Carrying strength beyond human limits, yet still bound by human fate. These were the heroes. They did what others could not. They built cities that would stand against time. They crossed seas that had never been sailed. They carved their names into the memory of the world itself. This was the age of Perseus and Heracles. Of Theseus and Atalanta. Of Jason and the Argonauts who sailed beyond the known world. Of Hector, Achilles, and Odysseus, whose names would echo through every generation that followed. They faced monsters that lurked in the dark corners of the earth. Creatures older than memory. Beasts that no ordinary man could stand against. They challenged kings. They defied fate. Some even stood against the will of the gods. And in the end, they turned against each other. At Troy, their greatest war was fought. A war not just of armies, but of pride, honor, and the unseen hands of the gods guiding every moment. Many of them died young. Many were forgotten. But their stories did not fade. They lived on in song, in carved stone, in tales passed from voice to voice across the years. Some were taken beyond the edge of the world, to the Isles of the Blessed, where the greatest among them would live in peace, untouched by suffering, forever remembered. The heroic age did not last long. But while it burned, it shone brighter than anything around it. And then, it too faded. After it came the age that Hesiod himself lived in. The Iron Age. The age of struggle. The age of now. This is not a time of peace. It is not a time of ease. It is a world grown heavy, worn down by time, burdened by its own weight. Men rise with the sun and work until it falls. Their hands shape the land, but the land does not always give back. Every harvest is uncertain. Every winter is a test. Life is no longer a gift freely given. It is something that must be fought for. People build families in a world filled with fear. They grow old carrying pain that does not fade. And slowly, something else begins to break. Trust. The bonds that once held people together weaken. Friends turn against each other. Families divide. The sacred laws between guest and host are forgotten. Justice no longer stands tall. It turns away, as if unwilling to see what the world has become. Truth becomes rare. Words lose their meaning. Promises are made without thought and broken just as easily. And the gods, if they still watch, do so in silence. Humanity reaches higher than ever before. Cities rise, towers stretch toward the sky. Power is chased, wealth is gathered, and in that pursuit, something is lost. The old ways are forgotten. The balance of the world is ignored. Forests fall. Lands change. The world bends under the weight of human ambition. And still, the struggle continues. It is said that even this age will not last. That one day, the gods will turn away completely. That Zeus himself will lower his thunderbolt. And when that day comes, humanity will fade, like smoke carried away into the wind. Yet even now, something remains. Hope. Small. Fragile. Easy to break. But still alive. People continue to build. To dream. To tell stories of a time when the world was different. A time when mortals lived without fear, and gods walked beside them. And perhaps that hope, quiet and stubborn, is the one thing that was never taken when Pandora opened the jar. Between the fading of the gods and the rise of men, there came a generation unlike any other. Born not only from earth, but from divine blood. These were the heroes. Their lives were short. Their paths often cruel. But their names would never disappear. They would echo across time, like distant thunder that never fully fades. Among the first and greatest of them was Perseus, a slayer of monsters, a founder of kings, a name that would stand at the beginning of many stories yet to come. But his story did not begin with glory. It began with fear. His mother Danae was a princess of Argos, daughter of King Acrisius. And like many rulers, the king feared what he could not control. An oracle had spoken. A simple truth, impossible to escape. His daughter would bear a son. And that son would one day be his end. Such prophecies cannot be changed. They cannot be bargained with. But still men try. Acrisius believed he could outrun fate. So he chose to act. He locked his daughter away, deep beneath the earth, in a chamber of bronze, sealed and guarded, a place where no man could reach her. A place where time itself seemed to stand still. But fate does not need doors. And the gods do not need paths. Zeus came to her, not as a man, but as golden rain, slipping through the smallest cracks, falling from above, beyond anything mortal could stop. And in that silent chamber, hidden from the world, Perseus was conceived. Because no matter how tightly fate is bound, it always finds a way. When Acrisius discovered the child, fear took hold of him once more. The prophecy had come to life. And yet, even in his terror, he did not dare to spill their blood. For even the most ruthless rulers feared the anger of the gods, and to kill his own daughter and her child would invite a punishment far worse than prophecy itself. So he chose another path. He placed Danae and her infant son into a wooden chest, sealed it, and cast it into the sea. He left their fate to chance, or to the will of Poseidon, believing that the waters would claim them and the prophecy would be ended without his hand being stained. But the sea does not always obey the plans of men. The chest did not sink. It drifted across the dark waters, carried by unseen currents, moving steadily across the vast, wine-dark sea. At last, it reached the island of Seriphos. There, a fisherman named Dictys found it, drawn ashore by his nets. When he opened the chest, he found not death, but life. A mother and her child, cast away by fate, yet still breathing. He took them in without question. He gave them shelter. He raised the boy as if he were his own. And so Perseus grew. Years passed, and the child became a young man, strong and steady. There was something in him that set him apart. In his bearing, there was the weight of something greater. In his eyes there was a quiet storm, a reflection of the blood that ran through him. He was not meant for a simple life. And peace, as always, does not stay long with those marked by destiny. The king of that land, Polydectes, saw Danae, and he desired her. But Perseus stood in his way. Now grown, he would not allow the king to take his mother. He stood firm, a silent challenge, a barrier that could not be easily removed. Polydectes could not strike him openly. To do so would bring dishonor. So he chose a different approach. He turned to deception. The king announced that he would take a wife, and demanded that every man bring him a gift. Horses, gold, anything worthy of a king. Perseus, who had neither wealth nor possessions, spoke without thinking. He declared that he would bring something greater than any gift offered. The head of Medusa. A promise made in pride. And one that would cost him his life, or so the king believed. For Medusa was no ordinary creature. She was one of the 3 Gorgon sisters, ancient beings born from the sea, terrible to behold. Their bodies were monstrous, their hair a mass of living snakes, their presence enough to fill even the brave with dread. But it was their gaze that made them truly feared. To look upon a Gorgon was to turn to stone. 2 of the sisters were immortal. Only Medusa could be killed. And no one who had gone in search of her had ever returned. Yet Perseus did not walk alone. The gods were watching. And for reasons of their own, they chose to help him. Athena, born of wisdom and war, gave him her shield. It was polished like a mirror, so clear that it could reflect anything before it. Through it, Perseus could see without meeting Medusa's gaze. Hermes, swift and clever, gave him a curved blade, sharp and unbreakable, and sandals that could carry him through the air. But even with these gifts, he did not know where to find the Gorgon. So Hermes guided him further. To the Grey sisters. They were ancient, older than most beings, and they shared between them a single eye and a single tooth, passing them back and forth as they spoke. They knew the path. But they would not give it freely. So Perseus used his mind. He waited until the moment they passed the eye between them, and then he took it. Without it, they were blind. And only then did they speak. They told him where to go. They told him of the nymphs who guarded what he would need. From them, Perseus gained the helm of Hades, which could render him invisible. A magical sack to carry what must not be seen. And the knowledge of a place beyond the edge of the world, where light did not linger, where the Gorgons slept among stone that had once been men. Armed with these gifts, Perseus set out. He flew across lands and seas, beyond the reach of ordinary men, until he reached the far edges of the world. There, in a dark and silent grove, he found them. The Gorgons. They lay sleeping, their forms twisted and terrible, surrounded by statues of those who had failed before him. Warriors frozen in their final moment, caught between courage and fear. Perseus did not look directly. He held Athena's shield before him, watching only the reflection. Step by careful step he moved. Slow, steady, silent, until he stood over Medusa herself. Then, without hesitation, he struck. The blade fell. And in a single motion, her head was severed. But even in death, her power remained. From her blood, 2 beings emerged. Pegasus, the winged horse, rising into the air with a cry that echoed across the sky. And Chrysaor, a warrior born with a golden blade in his hand. The children of Poseidon, brought into the world at the moment of her death. The other Gorgons awoke. Their cries tore through the air as they searched for the one who had done this. But Perseus was already gone. Hidden by the helm of darkness, he vanished from their sight. The task was complete. He began his journey back, carrying the head within the sack, its power still deadly, even in death. And along the way, fate brought him to another trial. He came upon the land of Ethiopia, where a great tragedy was unfolding. A sea monster had been sent by the gods to punish the king and queen for their pride. Their daughter, Andromeda, had been chained to a rock, left as a sacrifice to the creature. Perseus saw her. And in that moment, he chose to act. When the monster rose from the sea, he faced it without fear. And with the power he carried, he ended it. He revealed the head of Medusa, and in an instant, the creature turned to stone, frozen forever. Andromeda was saved. And she would become his wife, following him back across the world, the beginning of a new line that would carry his name forward. At last, Perseus returned to Seriphos. Polydectes did not believe him. He mocked the tale, seeing only a boastful man who had returned empty-handed. But Perseus did not argue. He reached into the sack. And he showed them the truth. The king, his court, all who stood before him, were turned to stone where they stood. In a single moment, the threat was ended. And the promise he had made was fulfilled. Dictys, the humble fisherman who had once pulled a drifting chest from the sea, now stood where a king had fallen. The man who had shown kindness when none was required, who had taken in strangers without question, was raised to the throne in place of Polydectes. For a moment, the world seemed to correct itself. Cruelty had been answered. Justice, in its quiet way, had been restored. But in the world of gods and men, such balance never holds for long. Prophecy, once spoken, does not fade. It waits. Perseus returned to Argos, to the land of his birth, to the place where his story had begun. But King Acrisius, still haunted by the words of the oracle, could not face him. Fear had never truly left him. Even now, it ruled him. And so, instead of standing his ground, he fled. Yet no man outruns fate. At the funeral games of a neighboring king, where athletes gathered and contests were held in honor of the dead, Perseus took part. Among the many events, he stepped forward to throw the discus. It was meant to be a test of strength. Nothing more. But in that single moment, fate moved unseen. The discus flew wide. And in the crowd, an old man fell. It was Acrisius. Struck down not by intent, not by hatred, but by chance. Or perhaps not chance at all. The prophecy had been fulfilled. Not through violence, not through revenge, but through a single act that could not be undone. And so, as it always does in myth, the circle closed. Perseus had become the instrument of a fate he never chose. He had slain monsters. He had saved the innocent. He had founded a legacy that would endure beyond his own life. And still, he could not escape what had been spoken before he was born. That is the nature of such stories. No matter how far one runs, destiny waits at the end of the path. Perseus did not rule forever. No hero does. But his name lived on. For from his blood would come another. A hero greater still. If Perseus was the first great hero, then Heracles was the mightiest. His name carried across the lands like distant thunder, heavy and unmistakable. Wherever stories were told, his was among them. He was not simply strong. He was larger than life itself. A figure standing between worlds, part man, part god, caught between joy and suffering, triumph and loss. He was the great-grandson of Perseus, a prince of Argos. And above all, he was the son of Zeus. And as with many born from such unions, his life would be shaped not only by blessings, but by suffering. Even his birth was marked by deception. Zeus, driven by desire, set his eyes upon Alcmene, the wife of Amphitryon, a general of Thebes. Taking the form of her husband, Zeus came to her, extending a single night beyond its natural bounds, stretching it into something longer, something outside the flow of time. From that union, Heracles was conceived. And when Amphitryon returned, he too lay with her, unaware of what had already occurred. And so, 2 children were born. Heracles, son of Zeus. And Iphicles, son of a mortal man. Twins, yet not equal. Hera watched all of this from Olympus. She knew her husband well. And she knew what such a child could become. To her, Heracles was not just another mistake. He was a threat. And she would not allow that threat to grow without challenge. Even as an infant, Heracles showed signs of what he would become. Hera sent 2 serpents into his chamber, silent and deadly, to end his life before it could truly begin. But the child did not cry. He reached out, his small hands closing around their necks, and crushed them with effortless strength. By the time the nurses arrived, it was already over. The serpents lay still, and the child was untouched. From that moment, his legend began. As he grew, he was trained in all the skills expected of a nobleman. Music, archery, wrestling, the driving of chariots. He learned quickly, his strength unmatched, his ability beyond others his age. And yet, there was something within him that could not be taught. Something restless. Something wild. A force that did not bend easily to control. In time, he reached manhood. He married Megara, the daughter of King Creon of Thebes. For a while, his life seemed steady. He had a home. A family. Children. For a brief moment, peace found him. But Hera had not forgotten. She never did. In a moment of divine anger, she reached into his mind and twisted it. Madness took hold. And in that darkness, Heracles lost himself. He turned upon those he loved. His own home became a place of destruction. And when it was over, when the madness lifted, he saw what he had done. His wife. His children. Gone by his own hand. The silence that followed was heavier than any battle. His cries rose upward, toward Olympus, toward the gods who had shaped his life. But no answer came. And so, he sought redemption. He went to the oracle at Delphi, seeking a way to atone. The Pythia spoke, her words unclear yet binding. He must serve Eurystheus, king of Tyrants. A man weaker than him in every way, yet placed above him by fate. Only through obedience, through suffering, could his guilt be answered. And so began the labors of Heracles. 12 tasks. Each one meant to break him. Each one meant to test the limits of even a hero. The first was the Nemean lion. A beast whose golden hide could not be pierced by any weapon. Heracles tracked it to its cave. When his weapons failed, he did not retreat. He fought it with his hands. And in the darkness, he strangled it, holding on until its strength failed. He took its hide for himself, using its own claws to cut through its skin, and wore it as armor. From that moment on, he carried the lion with him, a second skin, a symbol of what he had overcome. The second task was the Lernaean Hydra. A creature of many heads, each one regrowing when cut, making it impossible to kill by simple means. In the swamps, Heracles faced it. With every strike, 2 more heads grew in place of one. But he did not stand alone. His nephew Iolaus stood beside him. As Heracles cut the heads, Iolaus burned the wounds, sealing them before they could grow again. Together they fought until only one head remained. The final head, immortal. Heracles cut it and buried it deep beneath the earth. From the Hydra's blood, dark and deadly, he took its poison and dipped his arrows within it. From that moment on, his weapons carried a power that even the gods would fear. The third labor took Heracles into the quiet forests and open valleys where the Ceryneian hind roamed, a creature unlike any other. It was no ordinary animal. Its antlers shone like gold, its hooves gleamed like bronze, and it moved with a speed that no hunter could match. More than that, it was sacred to Artemis, the goddess of the hunt. To harm it would be to invite her wrath. And so Heracles did not seek to kill it. He pursued it. Across hills, through rivers, over long stretches of land, he followed it without rest. A full year passed in the chase. A year of patience, of endurance, of silent determination. At last, when the moment came, he did not strike. He captured it gently, carefully, without causing harm. And when Artemis herself appeared, anger rising at the sight, Heracles spoke truthfully. He explained his task, his burden, the path he had been forced to walk. The goddess, though unwilling, allowed it. And so the hind was taken, not by violence, but by restraint. The fourth labor was far less gentle. It led him to the mountains of Arcadia, where the Erymanthian boar roamed, a beast of immense size and fury. It ravaged the land, leaving destruction in its wake. Heracles hunted it through snow-covered peaks, driving it higher and higher until the cold and exhaustion slowed it. There, in the frozen heights, he seized it. He wrestled the creature into submission, bound it in chains, and carried it back alive. When he brought it before Eurystheus, the king did not stand to face it. He fled. Hiding himself inside a great bronze jar, he trembled as the beast was dragged before him, while Heracles stood laughing, unshaken. The fifth labor was not one of battle, but of humiliation. The stables of Augeas had not been cleaned for years. Thousands of cattle had filled them with filth beyond measure. The task was meant to degrade him, to reduce him to a servant. But Heracles did not work as others did. He did not carry waste by hand. Instead, he changed the land itself. He redirected rivers, breaking their course and sending them through the stables. In a single day, the filth was washed away, leaving the ground clean as if years of neglect had never been. The sixth labor brought him face to face with the Stymphalian birds. Creatures of bronze, with sharp beaks and feathers like blades, they devoured human flesh and darkened the skies with their wings. They could not be approached easily. But with the help of Athena, Heracles was given a rattle, a sound so sharp and sudden that it startled the birds into flight. As they rose into the air, he struck them down, one after another, until the sky was clear once more. The seventh labor carried him across the sea, to the island of Crete. There roamed a great bull, wild and uncontrollable, a creature born of divine origin, its rage tied to the will of the gods themselves. Heracles faced it without fear. He seized it, wrestling it into submission despite its strength, despite the fury in its eyes, despite the power that surged through it like a storm. And he brought it back alive. The eighth labor led him to Thrace, a land ruled by King Diomedes. There, he found the mares of Diomedes. Horses that fed not on grass, but on flesh. Their hunger was for human blood. They were savage, uncontrollable, driven by the same madness that ruled their master. Heracles turned that madness against him. He fed Diomedes to his own beasts. And once their master was gone, the mares grew calm. They followed him without resistance. The ninth labor was not meant to test his strength, but his judgment. He was sent to the Amazons, a nation of warrior women, to take the girdle of their queen, Hippolyta. At first, there was no conflict. The queen met him with respect, and she agreed to give him the girdle willingly. But Hera, ever watchful, intervened. She spread rumors among the Amazons, whispering that Heracles had come not as a guest, but as an enemy. And so, peace turned to war. Battle broke out. And in the chaos, Hippolyta fell. Heracles took the girdle, not as a gift, but as the prize of a conflict that should never have begun. The 10th labor took him to the far edges of the world, to the land of Erythea. There lived Geryon, a giant with 3 bodies joined as one, guarding a herd of red cattle. To claim them, Heracles faced not one enemy, but many. The herdsman, the hound that guarded the cattle, and Geryon himself. He fought them all. And when they fell, he drove the cattle across lands and seas, a journey that stretched beyond what most men could endure. At the narrow strait between lands he set markers of his passage, the pillars of Heracles, standing as a boundary between the known world and the unknown. But when he returned, Eurystheus refused to accept all he had done. He claimed that the Hydra had not been slain alone, and that the stables had been cleaned not by labor, but by trickery. And so, 2 more labors were demanded. The 11th task was to retrieve the golden apples of the Hesperides. They grew in a distant garden, guarded by nymphs and a great serpent that never slept. But Heracles did not face the guardian directly. Instead, he sought out Atlas, the titan who held the sky upon his shoulders. He offered to bear that burden, if only for a time. Atlas, eager for relief, agreed. And so Heracles stood beneath the heavens, carrying their weight, while Atlas went to retrieve the apples. But when Atlas returned, he did not wish to take the burden again. He offered to deliver the apples himself, leaving Heracles behind. But Heracles was not easily deceived. He agreed, but asked for a moment, just a moment, to adjust his position beneath the sky. Atlas took the weight once more. And in that instant, Heracles left, carrying the apples with him. The 12th and final labor was the greatest of all. To descend into the underworld. To face death itself. He was sent to bring back Cerberus, the 3-headed hound that guarded the gates of Hades. Armed with nothing but his strength, Heracles entered the realm of the dead. He stood before Hades, not as an enemy, but as one seeking passage. The god of the underworld gave his permission, but only if the beast could be taken without weapons. And so Heracles faced it with his hands alone. He wrestled the creature, holding it fast despite its strength, despite its rage, until it yielded. And he brought it to the world above. With that, the labors were complete. His redemption was earned. But his suffering was not over. Heracles continued to fight, to wander, to live a life that never truly found rest. He married again, fathered more children, and faced new trials. And still, Hera's hatred did not fade. In the end, it was not a monster that brought him down. It was deception. The centaur Nessus, dying from Heracles' arrow, gave Deianira, his wife, what he claimed was a charm of love. But it was poison. When she gave it to Heracles, believing it would keep his love, it burned into his flesh, spreading pain that could not be endured. Heracles, unable to escape it, chose his own end. He climbed Mount Oeta. There, he built a funeral pyre. But no one dared light it. Until at last, a man stepped forward. Philoctetes. For that act, he was given Heracles' bow, a weapon that would carry his legacy forward. The flames rose. And Heracles was consumed. But that was not his end. For Zeus would not let his son fade. He lifted him from the ashes, carrying him to Olympus. There, Heracles was made immortal. His suffering ended. His place among the gods secured. He was given Hebe, goddess of youth, as his wife. And so, the hero became more than a man. He became a god. His labors, born from grief and guilt, became the measure of greatness. Others would be remembered in stories. But Heracles was remembered in something more. In temples. In games. In the hearts of those who looked at his life and saw not just strength, but endurance. For even in suffering, he had endured. And that, more than anything, made him immortal. If Heracles stood as the greatest of heroes, a force of strength and endurance, then Theseus stood as something different. He was not defined by power alone. He was clever. Calculating. Human in a way that few heroes ever were. He did not simply destroy monsters or survive impossible trials. He built. He organized. He shaped the world around him. Where others left behind stories of battle, Theseus left behind a city. Athens. A place that would one day rise above all others, a center of thought, law, and culture. A city that would call itself the heart of civilization. His story moves between two worlds. The world of myth, filled with monsters and gods, and the world of men, shaped by choices, by leadership, by the slow building of power. Within him lived both strength and reason, force and thought. Like the people who would one day honor Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, carrying both spear and olive branch, Theseus embodied that same balance. Even his birth reflected this dual nature. He was said to have two fathers: Aegeus, king of Athens, and Poseidon, lord of the sea. On a single night, his mother Aethra lay with both, one mortal, one divine. From that union came a child marked by destiny, yet raised far from it. Theseus did not grow up in Athens. He was raised in treason, far from the throne that was meant for him, unaware of the full weight of his lineage. Before Aegeus departed, he left behind a sign. He placed a sword and a pair of sandals beneath a great stone, heavy and unmoving. When the boy was strong enough to lift that stone, he would be ready. Ready to claim who he truly was. Years passed. Theseus grew into a young man, tall, sharp in both mind and body, restless, as if something within him was always pushing him forward. At 16, he approached the stone. With effort, with strength earned over years, he lifted it. And beneath it, he found the tokens of his birthright. The sword. The sandals. A path laid out before him. Most would have chosen the easy road. They would have sailed to Athens, taking the quicker, safer route across the sea. But Theseus chose differently. He chose the land. The longer road. The dangerous one. Because he believed that a king should not simply inherit power. He should earn it. And so began his journey. Not against distant monsters or ancient gods, but against the dangers that plagued the everyday world. The roads themselves were filled with terror. And Theseus would clear them, one by one. He faced Periphetes, the club-bearer, a man who crushed travelers with a massive weapon. Theseus defeated him and took the club for himself, turning the weapon of terror into a symbol of justice. He faced Cenes, who bent trees to the ground and tied his victims between them, tearing them apart when they sprang back. Theseus ended him in the same way he had ended others. He met Sciron, who forced travelers to wash his feet, only to kick them from the cliffs into the sea below. Theseus threw him down those same cliffs, ending his cruelty. He faced Cercyon, a wrestler who killed all who challenged him. But Theseus did not rely on strength alone. He used skill, technique, and defeated him in a fair contest. Then there was Procrustes, who offered travelers a bed, only to stretch them or cut them to make them fit it. Theseus made him face his own cruelty. And in doing so, he brought an end to his reign. With each step, he did more than survive. He changed the land. The roads became safer. The fear that once ruled them began to fade. And in that quiet way, he prepared the path for something greater. For Athens itself. When at last he arrived, he did not enter as a prince. He entered as a stranger. Aegeus did not recognize him. But Medea did. The queen, skilled in sorcery and driven by her own ambitions, saw the danger in him immediately. She whispered to the king, urging him to poison the young man before he could reveal himself. And the cup was prepared. Theseus took it. But before he could drink, he revealed the sword. In that instant, Aegeus understood. The cup fell from his hand. And before all who watched, he embraced his son. For a moment, there was joy. But joy never lingers long in these stories. Even as father and son were reunited, a darker fate was already approaching. Athens lived under a shadow. Years before, in a war with Crete, the city had been defeated. And as punishment, a terrible tribute was demanded. Every 9 years, 7 young men and 7 maidens were sent to Crete. Not as guests. Not as prisoners. But as sacrifice. For beneath the palace of Knossos lay the labyrinth. A maze so vast and twisting that none who entered could find their way out. And within it lived the Minotaur. A creature born of pride and punishment. When Poseidon sent a sacred bull from the sea, King Minos had been meant to sacrifice it. But he kept it. And for that defiance, the gods cursed him. His wife, Pasiphae, was driven to love the beast. And from that unnatural union came the Minotaur. Half man. Half bull. A creature of strength and hunger, hidden away in the labyrinth, fed with the lives of the innocent. Theseus learned of this. And he made his choice. He would go. Not as a victim, but as a hunter. Before he left, he made a promise to his father. If he succeeded, if he returned alive, his ship would bear white sails. If he failed, the sails would remain black. And so he sailed to Crete, where fate waited once more. There, he was seen by Ariadne, daughter of King Minos. And in him, she saw something different. She chose to help him. She gave him a simple gift. A ball of thread. And with it, a way through the labyrinth. A path into darkness. And a path back out again. That night, Theseus entered the labyrinth. He stepped beyond the threshold where light faded, where stone walls rose on every side, twisting and turning without pattern or end. It was a place built not just to trap the body, but to break the mind. Every path looked the same. Every turn led deeper. Silence pressed in from all sides, heavy and suffocating. Behind him, the thread unspooled, a thin line of hope stretching back toward the world he had left behind. And somewhere within that endless maze, something waited. The Minotaur. He moved forward without hesitation. There was no turning back. At last, in the heart of that dark place, he found it. The creature stood in shadow, vast and terrible, its form neither fully man nor beast, but something caught between. Its breath was heavy, its presence filling the space like a storm waiting to break. They did not speak. There were no words. Only the clash of two fates meeting in the dark. Theseus moved first. Steel flashed in the dim light. The Minotaur charged, its strength shaking the ground beneath it. It was a battle of skill against brute force, of control against raw fury. Again and again they struck, until at last, Theseus found his moment. The blade fell true. And the beast collapsed. The curse of Crete ended in silence. For a moment, nothing moved. Then Theseus turned. Following the thread, step by careful step, he walked back through the maze, back through the darkness, until at last, he emerged into the open air. Alive. The impossible had been done. He gathered the Athenian youths, freed at last, and with Ariadne beside him, he fled Crete beneath the cover of night, sailing out across the open sea. For a brief time, it seemed as though fate had been kind. But in these stories, love is never simple. On the island of Naxos, everything changed. Whether by choice, by fear, or by the quiet hand of destiny, Theseus left Ariadne behind. Some say the god Dionysus came for her, claiming her as his own, raising her to a fate beyond mortal sorrow. Others say Theseus abandoned her, fearing what her presence might mean, a foreign queen beside him in Athens, a shadow over his rule. Whatever the truth, she woke alone. The ship was gone. And beneath unfamiliar stars, she wept. Theseus sailed on. But even heroes are not free from error. In his grief, or in forgetfulness, he failed to change the sails of his ship. They remained black. A sign of death. Far away, on the cliffs of Athens, King Aegeus watched the horizon. And when he saw the dark sails returning, he believed his son had fallen. The weight of that belief was too much to bear. And so, overcome with grief, he cast himself into the sea below. A sea that would forever carry his name. The Aegean. When Theseus returned, victory in his hands, he found only loss. He had defeated the monster. But he had lost his father. And so, he became king. Yet he did not rule as others had. He did not sit idle upon a throne. He built. He united Attica, gathering scattered villages and binding them into a single city, a single people. Athens was no longer divided. It became one. He established laws, festivals, and games. He shaped not just a kingdom, but a society. Where other heroes were remembered for strength, Theseus would be remembered for order, for structure, for the foundations of a world that would last beyond him. And still, he did not turn away from adventure. He stood beside Heracles. He fought the Amazons. He traveled into lands few dared to enter. And with his companion Pirithous, driven by reckless ambition, he attempted the unthinkable. To enter the underworld. To take Persephone herself from the realm of Hades. It was a plan born of pride. And it failed. Pirithous was taken, swallowed by the earth, lost forever. And Theseus was trapped. Bound to a seat within the underworld, his strength fading, his memory slipping away as the air of death closed around him. Time lost its meaning. Until at last, Heracles came. And with his strength, he pulled Theseus free, dragging him back into the world of the living. But even after that, even after all he had done, his story did not end in glory. Time moves forward. And people change. Athens grew beyond kings. New ideas rose. New voices. And Theseus, once the hero, once the builder, became something else. A memory of an older age. He was cast out. Driven into exile. He fled to the island of Skyros. There, he did not find honor. He found betrayal. The king, fearing him, or envying him, led him to the edge of a cliff. And there, without ceremony, without witness, Theseus was pushed to his death. No crowd. No crown. No final words. Only silence. Yet even then, his story did not end. His bones were later returned to Athens. Honored. Remembered. Because some legacies cannot be erased. Heracles stood for strength. But Theseus stood for something more lasting. The strength of the city. The idea that people could be bound not only by blood, but by law, by shared purpose, by the will to build something greater than themselves. Athens would rise. And though it would honor Athena as its patron, it would never forget the king who gave it form. And while these stories of heroes echoed across the land, another tale was already beginning. A journey unlike any other. A voyage that would gather heroes together, not in war, but in purpose. A quest that would stretch across seas and lands, through danger and betrayal. At its center stood a man who was not yet a legend. Jason. A prince who had lost his throne before he could even claim it. A man shaped not by prophecy, but by exile. His story began in Iolcus, a kingdom by the sea. There, his father had once ruled. But power does not rest easily. It had been taken. Peleus, his own brother, had seized the throne, casting aside blood and right, ruling only by strength. And he knew the danger. A child left alive could one day return. So he sought to end that threat before it could grow. But fate moved quietly. Jason was taken away in secret, hidden from the eyes of the court, raised far from danger. He was given not to kings, but to Chiron, the wise centaur, teacher of heroes. There, in the wild places of the world, Jason grew. He learned not just to fight, but to think. He was taught the stories of those who had come before him, of kings who had fallen, and of those who had risen again. Years passed, and when the time came, he returned. Not as a child, but as a man. As he crossed the river Inoros, he carried an old woman upon his back, helping her through the current. In doing so, he lost one of his sandals in the mud. The woman was no ordinary traveler. She was Hera, and she had tested him. When Jason entered the city, one sandal missing, Peleus saw him, and fear took hold. Because long ago, an oracle had spoken, "Beware the man who comes with one shoe." Jason did not hide. He did not strike. He spoke plainly. He was the rightful heir. Peleus, clever and cautious, did not deny him. But he did not surrender either. Instead, he offered a challenge. A test that was meant to send him far away. Or to his death. "If you wish to be king," he said, "then prove yourself. Bring me the golden fleece. From the distant land of Colchis. A prize guarded by kings, by magic, and by creatures no man could face alone. A journey from which no one returned." And so, without knowing it, Jason stepped onto the path that would make him a legend. "Bring back that ancient prize," Peleus said, "and I will give you the crown." It was a promise spoken with calm certainty. A promise meant to send Jason far away. Or to his death. The golden fleece was no simple treasure. It carried with it a story older than the throne itself. Long before Jason was born, a prince named Phrixus had fled across the sea upon the back of a ram with golden wool, sent by the gods to save him. When he reached the distant land of Colchis, he sacrificed the creature in gratitude. Its fleece, shining like living fire, was taken and hung upon an ancient oak tree within a sacred grove. There it remained, guarded, watched, by a serpent that never slept, and by King Aetes, son of Helios, the sun god. No Greek had ever gone there, and none had returned. Peleus knew this. That was why he smiled. But Jason did not refuse. He accepted. And in doing so, he set into motion one of the greatest voyages ever told. He did not go alone. He called for heroes. Not soldiers bound by command, but men and women who chose to follow, each driven by their own desire for glory, for adventure, for a place in something greater than themselves. And they came. Heracles, strongest of all. Orpheus, whose music could move stone and spirit alike. Atalanta, swift and deadly, unmatched in the hunt. Castor and Pollux, sons of Zeus. Meleager. Theseus. Cetes and Calais, the winged sons of the north wind. 50 heroes in all. Each one a legend. Together, they became something more. They became the Argonauts. Their ship was called the Argo. It was not an ordinary vessel. It was built by Argus, under the guidance of Athena herself. And within its prow was set a piece of sacred oak from Dodona. Would that could speak? Would that whispered warnings? That carried prophecy within it. The ship itself was alive in its own way. A guide through the unknown. They set sail eastward. Away from the known world. Into waters where stories were still being written. Their trials began not with monsters, but with people. On the island of Lemnos, they found a land ruled only by women. The men had been slain. And for a time, the Argonauts forgot their quest. They stayed. They rested. Jason himself lay with Hypsipyle, the queen, and from that union came sons he would never see grow. But the journey called them onward. In Thrace, they met Phineus. A blind prophet, cursed and tormented. Each time food was set before him, the Harpies descended, stealing it, fouling what remained, leaving him in endless hunger. The Argonauts did not turn away. The Boreads, swift as wind, drove the creatures off, chasing them across the sky until they fled. In return, Phineus gave them what they needed most. A path. He told them of the clashing rocks. 2 great cliffs that slammed together without warning, crushing anything that passed between them. No ship had ever survived. But there was a way. Following his advice, they released a dove. It flew between the rocks. And though the cliffs snapped shut, they caught only a single feather from its tail. That was enough. The Argos surged forward. Oars pulled with all their strength. The rocks closed behind them, scraping the stern, but not destroying it. And once they passed, the cliffs grew still, as if the sea itself had accepted their passage. At last they reached Colchis, a land of heat and shadow, of strange customs and ancient power. King Eats did not kill them. Not at once. In that world, strangers were sacred. To harm them without cause would invite the anger of the gods. So he listened. And then he set his terms. If Jason wanted the golden fleece, he would have to earn it. 3 tasks. Each one impossible. He was to yoke bulls that breathed fire, to plow a field with them, to sow it with dragon's teeth, and then face the warriors that would rise from the earth. No man could do this alone. And without help, Jason would have failed. But once again, the gods moved. At Hera's urging, Eros drew his bow, and his arrows struck Medea, daughter of Eats, a priestess of Hecate, a woman of knowledge and power, skilled in herbs, in spells, in things that most feared to touch. She had never loved. But now she did. And that love changed everything. She went to Jason in secret. She gave him a potion, one that would shield him from fire. She told him what to do. When the warriors rose from the earth, he was to throw a stone among them. They would turn upon each other, unable to see their true enemy. And so it happened. The bulls were harnessed. The field was plowed. The warriors rose and destroyed one another. The tasks were completed. But the final challenge remained. The serpent. It coiled around the tree, sleepless, eternal, guarding the fleece. No blade could reach it. No strength could overcome it. So Medea turned to something deeper. She sang. Soft words. Ancient words. Spells that wrapped around the creature like sleep itself. And slowly its eyes closed. Its coils loosened. Jason stepped forward and took the golden fleece. Soft as wool. Bright as flame. A prize worth kingdoms. They fled into the night. But escape was never simple. Eats pursued them. Ships cut through the sea behind them. And in desperation, Medea did something that could not be undone. She took her brother Absyrtus. And she killed him. Piece by piece, she cast him into the water, forcing her father to stop, to gather what remained, to choose between vengeance and duty. And in that moment of delay, the Argo escaped. Their journey home was long, filled with dangers that stretched beyond the known world, past Scylla and Charybdis, through storms and strange lands, until at last they returned. But the story did not end there. Peleus did not keep his word. He refused the crown. So Medea answered with her own kind of justice. She tricked his daughters. She showed them a false miracle, making an old ram young again through magic. And convinced, they did the same to their father. They cut him, boiled him, waiting for him to rise again. But he did not. And when the truth was known, the people turned against Jason. He had won the fleece, but lost everything else. He was driven out, forced into exile. He fled with Medea to Corinth. There, for a time, they lived in uneasy peace. But ambition does not fade. Jason sought more. A throne. Legitimacy. He chose to leave Medea behind. To marry a princess of Corinth. To begin again. But Medea was not a woman who could be cast aside. Her anger was not loud. It was quiet. Cold. Certain. She sent a gift to the new bride. A gown. Beautiful. And deadly. When it was worn, it burned. Fire that could not be escaped. The princess died in flames. And then, Medea did the unthinkable. She turned against her own blood. Their children. She killed them. Not in madness, but in purpose. A final wound that Jason would carry forever. And when it was done, she did not flee in fear. She rose. Carried away in a chariot drawn by dragons. A gift from Helios. Vanishing into the sky. Leaving behind a man who had gained everything. And lost more than any king ever could. Jason returned to Iolcus. But he did not return as a hero crowned in glory. He returned as a man already forgotten. In his final days he wandered among ruins. A shadow of the name he once carried. The man who had sailed with kings and heroes. Who had crossed the edges of the world. Who had taken the golden fleece from a land no one returned from. Now walked alone. With no throne. No honor. No place left for him. Time had moved on. And left him behind. One day he came to the Argo. The ship that had once carried him through storms and prophecy. Now pulled from the sea. Left to decay. Its wood cracked. Its strength gone. Its voice silent. Once it had lived. Once it had guided heroes. Now it was nothing more than bones. He rested beneath it. Perhaps remembering who he once was. perhaps searching for something already lost. And then, without warning, the past fell upon him. A beam broke loose. It dropped from above and struck his skull. So ended the life of Jason. Not in battle, not in triumph, but in silence, beneath the remains of the very ship that had made him known. Yet his story endured, because it was never about his end. It was about the journey, the gathering of heroes, the voyage into the unknown, the hunger for something greater, and the price that always follows ambition. In his story, Greece found one of its deepest truths: that greatness can be won, but it is never kept without cost. There are few bloodlines in Greek myth darker than the royal house of Thebes. Where other heroes faced monsters and distant lands, the kings of Thebes faced something far more cruel: their own blood, their own past, their own fate. Their legacy was not carved in victory, not sung in triumph, but written in riddles, madness, and murder. Even the birth of the city carried the shadow of what it would become. It began with Cadmus, a prince from Phoenicia, brother to Europa. When Zeus stole her away in the form of a white bull, Cadmus set out to find her. He searched across lands and kingdoms, but some things taken by the gods are never returned. When he failed, he turned to the oracle at Delphi. There he was given a different path. Stop searching. Follow a cow. And where it lies down, build your city. So Cadmus obeyed. He wandered across the land following the animal until at last it collapsed upon a hill. There he chose to begin again. But before a city could rise, blood was spilled. He sent his companions to fetch water. They never returned. At the spring a serpent waited, a creature sacred to Ares, ancient and deadly. It struck them down without mercy. Cadmus did not turn away. He faced the beast, and he killed it. But such acts never go unanswered. At the will of Athena he took the serpent's teeth and sowed them into the earth. From the soil warriors rose, armed, violent, born from blood itself. They were the Sparta, the sown men. And almost at once they turned upon one another, fighting without reason, without mercy, until only 5 remained. These 5 became the first noble families of Thebes, and Cadmus became their king. But the death of the serpent brought divine punishment. It had been sacred to Ares, and for that crime Cadmus was forced to serve the war god. Years of penance for a single act. Only then was he allowed to rule in peace. He married Harmonia, daughter of Ares and Aphrodite, and their wedding was attended by the gods themselves. A moment of beauty, of joy, of blessing. And yet even there the curse began. Among the gifts they received was a necklace, forged by Hephaestus, beautiful beyond measure, and cursed. A thing of beauty that would bring ruin to all who possessed it. And so the fall of Thebes began not with war, but with celebration. Generations passed. But the curse did not fade. It spread through blood, through children, through time. Cadmus' daughters each met terrible ends. Ino was driven mad and cast her own child into the sea. Autono's son Actaeon saw Artemis where no man should look and was torn apart by his own hounds. Semele loved Zeus but was tricked by Hera into demanding his true form and was burned to ash by divine fire. Agave in madness tore her own son Pentheus apart, believing him to be a beast. Each story carried the same truth: that fate once set in motion does not loosen its grip. But the greatest tragedy was yet to come. It would rise through Cadmus' descendant Laius. He became king of Thebes and took Jocasta as his queen. Yet the gods had not forgotten the sins of that bloodline. An oracle came, clear and unavoidable. If Laius had a son, that child would kill him and marry his own mother. The warning was given, but as always knowing was not enough. Laius chose to act against fate, and in doing so ensured it. A son was born. Fear took hold of him. He ordered the child's ankles pierced and bound, then gave him to a servant to be abandoned on the mountain, left to die. But even here fate did not break. The servant could not do it. He passed the child to a shepherd, and the shepherd carried him far away, to Corinth. There the king and queen who had no children took him in as their own. They named him Oedipus, the one with the swollen foot, and they never told him the truth. He grew strong, clever, proud, but whispers followed him, questions that would not rest. Seeking truth he went to the oracle, and there he heard the same prophecy. You will kill your father. You will marry your mother. Horrified he fled Corinth, believing the people who raised him were his true parents, thinking he could escape fate. But in running from it he ran directly toward it. On the road at a narrow crossing he met a man, old, proud, demanding. They argued over the rite of passage. Words turned to anger. Anger turned to violence. And in that moment Oedipus struck. He killed the man, and those who stood with him, never knowing that he had just fulfilled the first part of the prophecy. He had killed his father, Laius. He continued on to Thebes. The city stood under siege, not by armies, not by walls of iron or ranks of soldiers, but by a single creature, a terror that no blade could defeat, the Sphinx, a being of lion's body, wings of an eagle, and the face of a woman. She waited outside the city, watching, and all who passed were stopped, questioned, tested. Those who failed were devoured, their bones left as warning. The city could not fight her, could not reason with her, and so it suffered. When Oedipus arrived, he did not turn away. He stood before the creature, and she spoke her riddle. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 in the evening? Many had heard it. None had answered. Oedipus did not hesitate. Man. As a child he crawls on 4. As an adult he walks on 2. And in old age he leans on a staff. 3. The answer was given, and with it the curse was broken. The Sphinx let out a cry, and cast herself from the cliffs. The terror ended in a single moment. Thebes was saved. The people rejoiced. The stranger who had freed them was raised to the throne, a king chosen not by birth but by deed. And with the crown came a reward. The widowed queen, Jocasta, his mother, though either of them knew it. Years passed. Oedipus ruled well. The city prospered. He had children. 2 sons, Eteocles and Polynices. 2 daughters, Antigone and Ismene. For a time it seemed the curse had passed them by, that fate had been outmatched, that the story might end in peace. But fate does not forget. A plague came upon Thebes, slow at first, then merciless. Crops failed. Animals died. The air itself seemed poisoned. The people turned to their king, and the oracle spoke. The land was cursed, polluted by blood that had not been answered. And so Oedipus began to search for the truth. He questioned. He demanded answers. He pulled at threads that had long been hidden. And slowly, piece by piece, the truth came forward. The old man at the crossroads, the death long ago, the grief of the queen, the scars upon his feet, the servant who had spared him, and at last the words of Tiresias, the blind prophet, who saw more clearly than any man. You are the curse, the king, the son, the husband, the murderer, all in one. The truth could not be undone. Jocasta saw it first. She fled, and in her despair she ended her life. Oedipus followed, and when he saw what had come to pass, when he understood fully what he had become, he did not cry out for the gods. He did not ask for mercy. He punished himself. He took the brooches from her dress, and drove them into his own eyes, blinding himself, choosing darkness over the sight of what he had done. He begged for exile, and he was cast out. Once a king, now a wanderer, broken, blind, guided only by the hand of his daughter Antigone. He walked until the world itself seemed to grow quiet, and near Colonus he found his end. Not in violence, not in shame, but in silence. The earth itself took him, his grave hidden, his passing known only to the gods. But the curse did not end with him. It never does. His sons turned against each other. Eteocles and Polynices, brothers by blood, enemies by fate. They were meant to share the throne, to rule in turn. But power does not divide easily. Polynices was cast out, and in exile he gathered an army. From Argos, from distant lands, he returned with war at his back. The 7 against Thebes. The city burned. Steel met steel at its gates. Blood filled the ground. And in the end, the brothers met each other. Not as kings, not as sons, but as enemies. They fought, and they killed each other. Thebes survived, but it was broken. Its victory tasted of ash. Only Antigone remained to carry what little honor was left. Polynices was denied burial, declared a traitor, left to rot. But Antigone could not accept that. To leave the dead unburied was to deny them peace. She chose to act. She buried him, and for that she was condemned. By her own uncle, Creon. She was sealed away alive, left to die in darkness. The gods did not stay silent. Madness came, death followed, and Creon's house fell into ruin. Thebes endured, but its kingship became nothing more than a cycle of loss. The story of Oedipus is not one of victory. It is not a tale of monsters slain or empires built. It is a story of fate, of how a man can try to escape what is written, and in doing so walk directly toward it. It is a tragedy not born from evil, but from ignorance, from a man who sought truth, and was destroyed by it. The house of Thebes stood upon blood, upon riddles, upon curses that could not be broken, and no answer, no matter how clever, could ever change the will of the gods. And while these tragedies unfolded upon the earth, another story was already taking shape. A war greater than any before it. A war that would echo through all time. It did not begin with armies. It began with a wedding. All the gods were invited. All but one. Eris, goddess of discord. She was not welcome. And in her anger she came anyway. Not with words, but with a gift. A golden apple. Upon it were written 3 simple words. To the fairest. It was enough. Hera claimed it. Queen of the gods. Athena claimed it. Goddess of wisdom and war. Aphrodite claimed it. Goddess of beauty and desire. Each believed it belonged to her. And none would yield. So they turned to a mortal. Paris. A prince of Troy. Raised far from his city. Sent away at birth after a prophecy declared he would one day bring ruin upon it. Now he was called to judge the gods. On the slopes of Mount Ida they came to him. One by one. Each offering something in return. Hera promised power. Dominion over all men. Athena promised victory. Wisdom in war? Glory that would never fade. But Aphrodite offered something else. Love. The most beautiful woman in the world. Paris chose her. And with that choice, the fate of kingdoms was sealed. The woman was Helen of Sparta, daughter of Zeus, wife of Menelaus. In her youth she had drawn princes from every land. Kings. Warriors. Men who would do anything to claim her. And her father had feared what that would bring. Because beauty like hers does not end in peace. On the counsel of Odysseus. Clever. Far-seeing. Always thinking beyond the moment. A pact was forged. Not of friendship. Not of trust. But of necessity. Helen's beauty had drawn kings from every corner of Greece. Princes. Warriors. Men who would not accept defeat easily. And her father knew what that would mean. War would follow whichever choice was made. So Odysseus offered a solution. Bind them all. Every man who sought her hand would swear an oath. Whoever won Helen would be defended by all the rest. Any man who tried to take her would face them all. It was agreed. The oath was spoken. Sealed with ritual and laughter. But oaths are never just words. They take root. They bind not only men, but fate itself. Menelaus won her. Brother of Agamemnon. King of Mycenae. And so Helen became Queen of Sparta. Their rule was strong. Their kingdom stable. For a time it seemed the oath had brought peace. That wisdom had overcome chaos. Then Paris came. He arrived not as an enemy, but as a guest. Under sacred laws of hospitality. Protected. Welcomed. Trusted. And in that trust he saw her. Helen. The promise Aphrodite had given him. Whether she went willingly, drawn by desire, or was taken against her will. The stories never agree. The truth lost between song and memory. But when Paris sailed back across the sea, Helen was with him. And the oath awoke. Menelaus did not forgive. He did not hesitate. He called upon the promise that had been made. And the kings of Greece answered. Odysseus of Ithaca. Reluctant. Clever. Already weary of what war would bring. Nestor of Pylos. Old. Wise. A man who had seen generations rise and fall. Ajax the Greater. Towering. Unbreakable. Like a wall of iron in battle. Ajax the Lesser. Swift. Fierce. Quick to strike. Diomedes of Argos. Young. Bold. Hungry for glory. Idomeneus of Crete. Steady. Loyal. A king who would not turn away. From every land they came. Bound not by desire, but by oath. Only 2 tried to escape. Odysseus feigned madness. Plowing his fields. Sowing salt instead of seed. Acting as if his mind had broken. But the test was simple. His infant son was placed before the plow. And he turned aside. A father first. The lie exposed. He was bound to the war. Achilles was hidden. His mother knew what fate awaited him. Glory. And death. So she disguised him among the daughters of a king. Clothed in silk. Hidden from the world. But again it was Odysseus who uncovered him. Gifts were laid out. Jewelry. Fine cloth. And among them, weapons. A spear. A shield. Achilles chose them without thought. The warrior revealed himself. And with that choice, his fate was sealed. They gathered at Aulis. 1,000 ships. bronze shining under the sun, sails waiting like storm clouds, an army such as the world had never seen, ready to move, ready to burn Troy to the ground. But the winds did not come. The sea lay still. The ships did not move. Days passed. Then weeks. The men grew restless. The gods had turned away. The seer spoke. Artemis had been offended. By pride. By a boast. By blood spilled in the wrong place. The cause did not matter. Only the price. A sacrifice. Not of animals. Not of gold. But of blood. Royal blood. Iphigenia. Daughter of Agamemnon. Stories differ. Some say she was brought with promises of marriage, told she would wed Achilles. Others say she knew the truth, walked forward without fear. Some say Artemis took pity, replaced her with a deer at the last moment, carried her away. But in most tellings, the blade fell. The father gave his daughter to the gods, and the gods accepted. The winds rose, the ships sailed, and the world changed. They reached the shores of Troy, the great city of Ilium, ruled by Priam, defended by his sons. Hector, noble, bound by duty. Paris, beautiful, weak, the cause of it all. Deiphobus, Helenus, and many more. Warriors who would stand for their home until the end. The gods chose sides. Hera, Athena, Poseidon, with the Greeks. Aphrodite, Ares, Apollo, Artemis, with Troy. Even Zeus, king of gods, tried to remain above it. But even he was drawn in. By blood. By fate. By love. The war was no longer mortal. It had become divine. This was not yet the story told in the Iliad. That would come later. In the 10th year. When rage would burn brightest. But the war had already begun. Long before the first duel. Long before the first hero fell. It began with broken trust. With pride. With desire. With the sacrifice of a daughter. And with the judgment of gods who watched and chose sides. It was a war born not only of love, but of pride, of jealousy, of ancient curses that refused to die. And it would not end in victory. It would end in fire. By the time the great songs begin, the war had already lasted 9 years. 9 long years of siege. What began in fury had grown cold, hard, endless. The Greeks who had once stormed across the sea with rage now lived in waiting. Their ships pulled high onto the sand. Their camps built like dark scars along the shore. Day after day they raided nearby lands. Not just for glory, but for food, for survival. The war dragged on, like a wound that would not close. Both sides bled. Both sides endured. And neither could end it. The heroes grew restless. The men grew tired. And the world itself seemed to hold its breath. Because the true storm had not yet begun. The Trojans remained behind their walls. High, unbroken. Walls said to have been raised by Poseidon himself, with Apollo once serving beside him in punishment. Stone laid by gods and men together, strong enough to hold back the world. Within them the people endured. They had lost their fields. The lands beyond the gates had been burned and stripped bare. But still they held. Their allies came from distant lands. From the east. From the north. Sarpedon of Lycia. Memnon of Ethiopia. Warriors drawn not just by loyalty, but by honor. By the call of a war that had already become legend. And still the Greeks did not leave. Not without Helen. Not after everything that had been done. Pride held them as tightly as any oath. The war was no longer just about a woman. It had become a question of legacy. Of names that would live or vanish. But wars are not fought by walls or ships. They are fought by men. And in this war 2 men stood above all others. Agamemnon, king of kings, ruler of Mycenae, a man of authority, of command, stern, unyielding, and Achilles, son of Thetis and Peleus, the greatest warrior of his age, a man born for glory, fated to die young, and determined that his name would never fade. The clash between them would shake the entire Greek army. It began, as such things often do, with a woman. During one of their raids the Greeks had taken captives. Among them Chryseis, daughter of a priest of Apollo, and Briseis, a princess. Chryseis was given to Agamemnon, Briseis to Achilles. Then the priest came, old, desperate, bearing gold, offering ransom for his daughter. He spoke with respect, with humility, but Agamemnon refused. He mocked the man, drove him away. The priest prayed, and Apollo answered, not with thunder, Not with fire, but with plague. A quiet death that moved through the camp. From animal to man. From breath to breath. The air itself became poison. Men fell without wounds. Without battle. At last the truth was spoken. By the seer Calchas. This was Apollo's wrath. And it would not end until the girl was returned. Agamemnon had no choice. He gave her back. But his pride demanded payment. And so he took Briseis. From Achilles. It was more than an insult. It was dishonor. A wound deeper than any blade. Achilles rose in fury. Before all the kings. He called Agamemnon greedy. A coward hiding behind the strength of others. He swore an oath. Before gods and men. He would not fight. Let them face the war without him. And so he withdrew. To his tent. Taking with him the Myrmidons. His warriors. Silent. Deadly. The finest soldiers in the army. From that moment, the tide began to turn. Without Achilles the Greeks weakened. The Trojans pressed forward. Led by Hector. Son of Priam. Defender of Troy. He was not like Paris. Not driven by desire. Not careless. Hector carried his city on his shoulders. A husband. A father. A prince who fought not for glory, but for duty. Day by day he drove the Greeks back. Toward the sea. Ships burned. Warriors fell. The line broke again and again. And Achilles watched. He did nothing. Until Patroclus could bear it no longer. Friend. Companion. The one man who could reach him. Some said brother in spirit. Some said more. But all knew their bond was unbreakable. He begged Achilles. Let me fight. Let me wear your armor. Let me lead your men. The Trojans will think it is you. They will fall back. Achilles agreed. But with a warning. Drive them from the ships. Do not chase them to the city. Patroclus went to war. Clad in Achilles' armor. Leading the Myrmidons. And for a moment. It worked. The Trojans faltered. They believed Achilles had returned. They were driven back. But victory is dangerous. Patroclus pressed forward. Too far. Too close to the gates. And there. He met Hector. They fought. Hard. Relentless. And Patroclus fell. Struck down. His life ending in the dust before Troy. With him. The last restraint on Achilles broke. When the news reached him. The camp shook with his grief. He did not weep quietly. He roared. Like a storm tearing the sky apart. This was no longer war. This was vengeance. His mother Thetis came to him. Brought him new armor. Forged by Hephaestus. Bronze that shone like sunlight. A shield carved with the story of the world itself. And Achilles returned to battle. Nothing could stand before him. He became a force of destruction. Men fell before him in waves. Chariots shattered. Blood darkened the earth. The river itself choked with the dead. He sought only one man. Hector. Around the walls of Troy they ran. Once. Twice. 3 times. The greatest of warriors chasing the greatest defender. At last Hector turned. And they fought. Hector stood his ground. Faced death without fear. But Achilles was beyond mercy. Beyond reason. He struck. And Hector fell. The prince of Troy. The heart of the city. Gone. But Achilles' rage did not end there. He tied Hector's body to his chariot. And dragged it through the dust. Around the walls. Again and again. Denying him honor. Denying him rest. The city watched. And the war. Reached its darkest point. Priam. The old king. The man who had watched his world slowly break piece by piece. Who had buried sons. Who had seen his city bleed for years. And yet in the darkest hour he chose something no warrior had chosen. Not pride. Not anger. But humility. In the deep silence of night he left Troy. Alone. Guided by Hermes through shadows and enemy lines. Past sleeping soldiers. Past men who would have killed him without a second thought. He moved like a ghost through the camp until he reached the tent of Achilles. And there, a king knelt. Not before a god. Not before a throne. But before the man who had killed his son. Priam took Achilles' hands. The same hands that had dragged Hector through the dust. And he kissed them. Not as a ruler. But as a father broken by grief. He spoke softly. Not of war. Not of victory. But of loss. Of love. Of what it means to watch your child die. He asked Achilles to remember his own father. To remember that even the strongest man is still a son. And something inside Achilles broke. The rage that had burned like fire finally dimmed. He saw not an enemy. But an old man who carried the same pain he did. The same emptiness. Achilles wept. Not as a warrior, but as a human. He lifted Priam, gave him food, gave him rest, and at last he gave him Hector's body, returned with honor, with dignity, as it should have been. For a brief moment, the war paused, enemies shared grief, and the world grew quiet. But such moments do not last. Achilles was never meant to see the end of the war. Some say it was Paris who loosed the arrow, others say Apollo himself guided it. But the end came the same way. A single strike, finding the only place Achilles could be wounded, his heel. The greatest warrior alive fell, not defeated in battle, not overcome by strength, but by fate. Young, unmatched, gone. And still the war continued. The story does not end with Achilles. It does not end with grief, because the war itself had not finished its work. The Iliad closes with mourning, with funerals, with sorrows shared between enemies. But beyond that ending, the war still burned, waiting for its final act. 10 years had passed. 10 years of blood. The land itself seemed exhausted. Fields burned. Rivers choked with bodies. Warriors no longer fought for glory. They fought because they could not leave. Kings had become tired men. Heroes had become stories already half forgotten. Troy still stood. But it stood like something already fading. Its strength was gone. Its hope thinning. Its sons fallen one after another. Hector, the shield of the city, dead. Troilus, cut down before his time. Polydorus, slain in betrayal. Each loss hollowed the city further. And yet it endured. Because it had to. Then one morning everything changed. The Greeks were gone. No ships on the horizon. No soldiers at the gates. No sound of war. Only silence. After 10 years. Silence. And before the city, standing alone upon the empty plain, was something vast. A wooden horse. Massive. Towering. Its body smooth. Carefully built. Its shape carved with purpose. Not as a weapon, but as an offering. Or so it seemed. The Trojans did not celebrate. Not at first. The war had taught them caution. Priam questioned it. Others warned against it. Nothing in war ends so easily. Then came Sinon. A single Greek left behind. Bound. Bruised. He told the story. Slowly. Carefully. Each word placed exactly where it needed to be. The Greeks had fled. The horse was a gift. An offering to Athena. Left behind so the goddess would not destroy them on their journey home. If Troy accepted the gift, if they brought it into their city, the favor of the goddess would become theirs. Power, protection, victory for generations. But if they destroyed it, the gods would turn against them. Hope is dangerous. After 10 years of war, after so much loss, it was easier to believe. Only one voice stood against it. Laocoon, a priest, a man who still saw clearly. He warned them, his words cutting through the illusion. Do not trust them. Not even now. Not after everything. He hurled his spear. It struck the horse. The sound that followed was wrong. Hollow. Something moved inside. Something hidden. For a moment, the truth was there. Right before them. Then the sea opened. Serpents rose from the water. Enormous. Coiled. Their eyes burning like fire. They came not slowly, but with purpose. With violence. They seized Laocoon and his sons, wrapped around them, crushing bone, smothering breath, dragging them down as the people watched. And the meaning was twisted. They saw punishment, not warning. They believed the gods had struck him down for doubting the gift. And in that moment, the last chance was lost. They chose belief. They opened the gates. With ropes. With effort. With celebration. They dragged the horse into Troy. Songs filled the streets. Wine was poured. The war was over. At last. Or so they thought. Night fell. The city slept. And inside the horse, the trap opened. One by one they emerged. Odysseus. Silent. Watching. Menelaus. Burning with purpose. Neoptolemus. Son of Achilles. Carrying his father's rage. Diomedes. And others. Chosen not for honor, but for what came next. They moved quickly. Quietly. Through sleeping streets. To the gates. And opened them. Out at sea the Greek fleet returned. Hidden. Waiting for this moment. They came back in silence. Like shadows returning to claim what was left unfinished. Troy never woke. Not truly. What followed was not battle. There was no line. No clash of armies. No chance to fight back. It was slaughter. Fire spread through the streets. Houses burned. Cries filled the night. Steel cut through anyone who moved. Neoptolemus stormed the palace. A storm given form. He found Priam, old, unarmed, standing at the altar. And he killed him. No honor. No mercy. The king who had ruled for decades died where he prayed, his blood soaking into the stone. Cassandra was dragged from the temple, screaming truth that no one would hear, as she always had. Hecuba watched it all. Her children dead. Her city burning. Her world ending in a single night. The walls still stood. But Troy was already gone. The Greeks showed no mercy. Not in victory. Not at the end. The war had stripped away what little restraint remained. A decade of blood had hardened every heart. There was no honor left to defend. Only destruction to finish. Astyanax, the infant son of Hector, the last hope of Troy's line. A child who had done nothing. Who could do nothing. And yet even he was not spared. He was taken. Carried to the walls his father had once defended. And thrown down. Because the Greeks feared what he might become. A son who might rise. A name that might return. And so they ended it. Before it could begin. Temples were defiled. Sacred ground turned into slaughter. Women were taken. Kings were cut down. The city that had stood for 10 years fell in a single night. Troy, once the pride of Asia, reduced to fire and ash. And Helen, the face that had begun it all. She was found within the palace. Alive. Untouched. Some say she wept. Begged forgiveness. A woman broken by what she had caused. Others say she stood calm. Untouched by guilt. As if the war had never truly belonged to her. Menelaus came to her. Sword in hand. Rage burning through him. This was the moment he had waited for. The end of everything. The reason for 10 years of blood. And yet, when he looked at her, he stopped. The blade fell from his hand. Whether it was love, or weakness, or something deeper that even he did not understand. No one can say. But he did not kill her. He took her back. And with that, the war found its final victory. When dawn came, there was nothing left. Smoke drifted across the plain. Ash settled where a city had once stood. The walls that had resisted armies for 10 years had fallen in a single night of deception. The gods turned their eyes away. Their work was done. But victory did not bring peace. Because the war had not ended. It had only changed. The victors carried their own curses. Ajax the Lesser, who had dragged Cassandra from Athena's temple, who had broken sacred law in the worst way, thought himself safe. But the gods do not forget. On his journey home the sea rose against him. Storms tore his ship apart. And he was drowned. Claimed by the same forces he had defied. Agamemnon returned to Mycenae. The king of kings. The man who had led the war. He came home with spoils. With stories. And with Cassandra at his side. The prophetess no one believed. But the past was waiting. The sacrifice of his daughter, Iphigenia. The blood he had given for the winds. It had not been forgotten. Not by the gods. And not by his wife. Clytemnestra had waited. Years of silence. Years of grief turning into something colder. Something sharper. She had taken a lover. Aegisthus. A man with his own hatred. His own reason for revenge. Together they prepared. When Agamemnon entered his home. Victorious. Untouched by battle. He walked into death. Some say he was struck down in his bath. Defenseless. Others say he was trapped in a robe. Unable to move as the blade fell. But in every telling, the end is the same. He died in his own house. And Cassandra, who had seen it coming, who had spoken the truth until no one listened, she died beside him. Her voice unheard to the very end. Clytemnestra stood over them. Not ashamed. Not afraid. She called it justice. And in that house, blood called for blood. It did not end there. Orestes, son of Agamemnon, returned from exile. Called by Apollo. Driven by duty. And by something darker. He came home not as a son, but as an executioner. He killed Aegisthus. And then, he killed his mother. The act was done. The vengeance complete. But the cost remained. Because to kill one's own blood is a crime even the gods cannot ignore. The Furies came for him. Ancient. Relentless. Spirits of vengeance older than Olympus itself. They hunted him. Drove him to madness. His story did not end in death. But in judgment. In trial. In the struggle between old justice and new. A tale that would shape the very idea of law itself. And while kings fell, and families tore themselves apart, others wandered. Menelaus returned to Sparta with Helen. But their names were never clean again. The war followed them. In whispers. In memory. Diomedes. Nestor. And many others faded into shadow. Their stories ending not in glory, but in silence. Only Odysseus. He did not return. Not for 10 long years. Cursed by Poseidon. Driven across the sea. From island to island. From monster to storm. His journey became something else entirely. Not a war, but a test. Of endurance. Of will. Of a man trying to find his way home through a world that no longer made sense. And one more escaped the fire. Aeneas. Son of Anchises. Son of Aphrodite. He did not stay to die with Troy. He carried his father upon his back. Took his son by the hand. And fled into the night. Guided by signs. By fate. By something that had not yet ended. He did not know where he was going. Only that he must go. West. Toward lands not yet written. From his blood. So later stories would say. Would come Rome. Romulus. Remus. A new empire rising from the ashes of the old. So Troy did not truly die. It changed. The fall of Troy was not just the end of a city. It was the end of an age. The heroic age. When men stood beside gods. When glory mattered more than life. When fate was something you met face to face. It had begun with a golden apple. With pride. With a choice made on a quiet hillside. And it ended in fire. In betrayal. In grief. The walls that had held for 10 years fell in a single night. And the ashes drifted out across the sea. Carried by winds that did not care who had won. But the story did not end there. Because the journey home would be far more dangerous than the war itself. The gods were not satisfied. Not yet. The same winds that had once carried armies to Troy now scattered them across the world. Ships lost. Crews broken. Kings reduced to wanderers. Agamemnon had already fallen. His return marked by betrayal. By blood spilled in his own halls. Clytemnestra ruled for a time. Unrepentant. Until Orestes returned and the cycle began again. In that house. Vengeance was never finished. It passed from one generation to the next. Like a curse that could not be broken. And far from land. On dark waters. Another story was still unfolding. A man. Trying to go home. But Odysseus was not the only one whose path home was broken. The sea did not carry the victors gently back to their lives. It scattered them. Turned them. Tested them. Menelaus and Helen did not sail straight to Sparta. The winds turned against them. Drove them far from home. South. Toward Egypt. Toward lands that did not know the war. Some stories say something stranger still. That the Helen who stood in Troy was never real. Only a phantom. A shadow shaped by the gods. While the true Helen remained in Egypt the entire time. Untouched. Unheard. Waiting while men killed each other for an illusion. Others say she went willingly with Paris. That the war was born not only of theft, but of choice. And when it ended, when the fire died, Menelaus found her again, and chose to forgive. Not because the past could be undone, but because he was tired. Tired of war. Tired of loss. They returned to Sparta. Together. But nothing was the same. Helen's name had once been beauty. A story sung with wonder. Now it carried something darker. A reminder of what had been lost. Sparta stood. But it would never rise as it once had. Not after her. And yet, of all the men who sailed from Troy, none suffered as long, or as deeply, as Odysseus. His war did not end at Troy. It followed him. Across the sea. For 10 more years. He had been clever. Too clever. The mind behind the horse. The man who had broken Troy not with strength, but with deception. And for that, the gods did not forgive him. Poseidon marked him. And the sea became his prison. Island after island. Trial after trial. Each one stranger than the last. He came to the land of the Cyclops. Faced Polyphemus. A giant. A son of Poseidon himself. And through wit, not strength, he escaped. Blinded the creature. Named himself nobody so that when the Cyclops cried out for help no one came. It was a victory. But it was also a mistake. Because when Odysseus revealed his true name, pride overcame caution. And Poseidon heard. From that moment, the sea would never let him rest. He met Circe, a sorceress who turned his men into swine. Held him there. Tested him. Changed him. He stayed not for days, But for a year, he traveled to the edge of the underworld, spoke with the dead, heard truths no living man was meant to hear, saw what waited at the end of all journeys. He passed the sirens, their song pulling at his mind, promising knowledge, promising everything. He bound himself to the mast, ordered his men to seal their ears with wax, and listened, knowing he could not answer. He sailed between monsters, Scylla on one side, Charybdis on the other, death either way, and still he chose. Lost men, lost more than he could count. One by one his crew vanished, through storm, through hunger, through their own mistakes, until at last he was alone. He reached Calypso, a nymph who offered him something no man refuses easily: safety, immortality, a life without struggle. She kept him there for 7 years, loved him, tried to make him stay. But even that was not enough. He wanted home. At last the gods relented. Just enough. He was allowed to leave, cast again upon the sea, broken, alone, until he reached the Phaeacians, a people who still honored strangers, who listened, who believed his story. They gave him a ship, and sent him home, Ithaca. After 20 years, he did not return as a king. He returned as a shadow, dressed in rags, silent, watching, because his home was no longer his. Suitors had taken it, filled his halls, feasted on his food, pressured his wife, Penelope, to choose another husband, to forget him. But she waited, year after year, weaving a shroud by day, unweaving it by night, holding time itself at bay, refusing to believe he was gone. Odysseus did not reveal himself. Not yet. He watched, tested, waited for the moment. Then came the bow, a challenge none could meet, a weapon only he could string. And when he took it, when the string tightened in his hands, the truth was revealed. The king had returned, and there would be no mercy. With his son Telemachus, with a few loyal servants, he struck. One by one, the suitors fell. The hall ran red with blood. Order was restored. But even then, peace did not come easily, because the world Odysseus returned to was not the one he had left. And the war was never truly over. Others found no peace at all. Ajax the Lesser was destroyed by the gods for his crimes. Diomedes returned home only to find betrayal waiting. His wife unfaithful. His city no longer his. He wandered, built new homes, only to fade into legend. Philoctetes, who had slain Paris, found no welcome, became another name lost to time. Neoptolemus, son of Achilles, killed not in battle, but at an altar, cut down where he should have been safe. The war had promised glory, but it gave only ashes. The heroes who had stood together before Troy did not return as legends. They returned as broken men, to homes that no longer felt like home, to gods who had not forgiven them, to stories that did not match what they had lived. In the end, there were no victors, only survivors. And behind all of it, behind every war, every fall, every story of men, stood something older. The gods, long before Troy, before heroes, before ships crossed the sea. The world had been shaped by them, their will, their rivalries, their choices. Their stories run beneath every tale. Quiet, constant, unavoidable. Because it was they who shaped fate. And it was not always them who ruled. Before Olympus, there had been chaos. Then came Gaia, Uranus, Cronus. The world was not born in peace. It was born in struggle, in conflict between generations. Fathers cast down by sons. Power taken, not given. The Titans ruled, until Zeus rose against them. The youngest, the one who should have had nothing. He freed his siblings, fought his father, and cast the Titans into Tartarus. From that war, a new order rose. The Olympians, 12 gods, rulers of the world. Zeus, king of the sky. Hera, queen of gods. Poseidon, lord of the sea. Demeter, giver of harvest. Hestia, keeper of the hearth. Athena, wisdom and war. Apollo, light and prophecy. Artemis, hunt and moon. Ares, blood and battle. Aphrodite, love and desire. Hephaestus, fire and forge. Hermes, messenger, trickster, guide. They ruled from Olympus. But they were not perfect. They loved. They hated. They chose sides. They made mistakes. And because of them, The world of men was never simple. Upon Mount Olympus a new order rose. Not gentler than what came before. Not kinder, but sharper, more complex, and far more entangled with the lives of mortals. The age of the Titans had been one of raw force, of power without thought. The Olympians were different. They ruled not only with strength, but with mind, with desire, with calculation. At the center of it all stood Zeus, king of gods and men, seated upon a throne of gold, the thunderbolt always close to his hand. His voice carried across heaven and earth. Not just a ruler of storms, but a ruler of order. He did not hold power through force alone. He understood balance, alliances, the cost of rebellion. He rewarded loyalty. He punished betrayal. And he never forgot either. He divided the world, not out of kindness, but out of necessity. The sky he kept for himself, the open air, the storms, the heavens. The sea he gave to Poseidon, deep, unstable, a realm that could be calm one moment and furious the next. The underworld went to Hades, the silent kingdom beneath the earth, where all souls would one day pass, and between them lay the earth, shared, uneasy, a place where gods and mortals crossed paths, where powers shifted without warning. Around Zeus the new pantheon took form, each god a force, each one shaping the world in ways both seen and unseen. Hera stood beside him, queen of Olympus, goddess of marriage, of birth, of the bonds that hold families together. But her throne was not one of peace. Zeus was never faithful. His desires moved as freely as the winds he commanded. Goddesses, nymphs, mortal women, none were beyond his reach. And from those unions came children, heroes, kings, names that would echo through time. Heracles, Perseus, Helen, Minos, and many more. Hera watched, and she remembered. Her anger was not sudden, not loud. It was patient, cold, enduring. She punished not Zeus, but those he loved, their lives shaped by her wrath, their suffering stretching across generations. Then there was Athena, born not from a mother, but from Zeus himself. When the time came she did not cry. She did not grow. She burst forth, fully formed, armored, a goddess of wisdom and war. But not war as chaos, not war as slaughter. Her war was thought, strategy, precision. She favored those who used their minds, those who could see beyond the moment. Odysseus above all. She guided cities, protected them, built them into something lasting. Athens bore her name, a place where reason stood beside power. She was the balance to Ares, because Ares was war in its purest form. Blood, rage, destruction. He did not care for victory, only for the clash, the scream, the chaos. Even the gods did not trust him. Apollo and Artemis, twins, light and shadow. Apollo shone like the sun itself, golden, radiant. He ruled prophecy, music, healing, but also plague. He could bring life, or take it away with equal ease. At Delphi his voice shaped kings. Through the Pythia he spoke in riddles, words that could build empires, or destroy them. Artemis walked a different path, wild, untamed. She belonged to the forests, to the mountains, to the silence beyond cities. A huntress, a protector of animals, of those who lived outside the order of men. She asked for nothing, and forgave nothing. Those who crossed her paid for it. Without mercy, Demeter, keeper of the earth. She gave life to the land, grain, harvest, the quiet miracle that fed all living things. But when her daughter Persephone was taken by Hades, the world changed. Her grief was not quiet. It was vast. Crops died. The earth turned cold. Life faded. And from that sorrow came the seasons. Winter, spring, loss, return. A cycle that would never end. Aphrodite moved among them. Beauty given form. Desire made real. Some said she rose from the sea itself, from the foam where Uranus fell. Others said she was born of Zeus. But all agreed on one thing. No one escaped her influence. Gods, mortals, kings, beggars, all were equal before love. And love in her hands was never simple. It brought joy, but also ruin. She was married to Hephaestus, the god of the forge, the craftsman, twisted in body, brilliant in mind. Yet her heart belonged to Ares. And in that union, love and war became one. Hephaestus himself stood apart. Not beautiful, not graceful, but unmatched in skill. From his hands came wonders. Armor, palaces, machines that moved like living things. Though cast aside, though mocked, he built the very tools the gods relied upon. Hermes moved between them all. Messenger, trickster, guide. Nothing was closed to him. Not Olympus, not the underworld, not the minds of men. He crossed every boundary, broke them, remade them. His laughter never far, his purpose never clear until it was done. And there was Hestia, quiet, unseen. She did not seek power, did not seek glory. She tended the hearth, the fire at the center of every home, the one place where peace could exist. She asked for little, and gave something rare. Stability, warmth. This was the world of Olympus. Not distant, not silent. The gods were not removed from life. They were within it. They chose sides. They interfered. They loved. They hated. They fought through mortals as often as they fought each other. Cities rose in their names. Temples burned for their favor. Oracles spoke their will. Every decision, every war, every life touched in some way by their hands. Unlike the Titans, who were forces of nature, the Olympians were something else. They were reflections of humanity, of desire, of pride, of jealousy, of love, made greater, made eternal. Their grudges lasted forever. Their passions burned without end. They could raise a man to greatness, or destroy him for a single mistake. And yet, for all their power, they were not absolute. They could be tricked. They could be bound by oath. And above even them, there was something else. Something older. Something even the gods could not escape. Fate. Even Zeus, seated high above the clouds with thunder in his hand and the heavens beneath his command, was never truly free from fear. The same fear that had driven his father Cronus to madness lived quietly within him. The fear that power is never permanent. That one day a child of his own blood would rise and cast him down just as he had done before. It was a shadow that never left him. And because of it, he made choices that would shape the fate of gods and men alike. When it was foretold that Thetis would bear a son greater than his father, Zeus did not take her as his own. He stepped back. He gave her instead to a mortal king, Peleus. Not out of kindness, not out of mercy, but out of fear. Because a mortal son, no matter how great, would still be bound by death. And so Achilles was born. Mighty beyond all others. Destined for glory. But also destined to die young. In this, the Olympians revealed a truth they could never escape. They were not so different from mortals. They feared loss. They guarded their power. They clung to their thrones and struck down anything that threatened the order they had built. For a time, that order held. Their names were carved into stone and marble. Their temples rose across hills and valleys. Their stories were sung in every corner of the world. Their symbols marked shields and coins and banners. The age of heroes had come and gone, but the gods still ruled. Still watched. Still shaped the lives of men. Yet even as their power stretched across the world, there were whispers of change. Quiet at first. Almost unheard. Tales carried on distant winds. Of other gods. Of other powers stirring beyond the horizon. The world was shifting, slowly and unseen. The temples that once stood full would not remain so forever. The voices that once praised Olympus would one day fall silent. But for now, Olympus still stood. High above all. Untouched. Unchallenged, or so it seemed. Because even at the height of their power, the Olympians were never alone. There were forces older and stranger than their golden halls. Powers that did not sit on thrones or rule through law, but moved through shadow and instinct. Gods not of order, but of chaos. Of wine and madness. Of death and rebirth. Of the hidden and the forbidden. These were not worshipped in great temples. Their rites were whispered in forests. Carried out in caves lit by flickering fire. Felt rather than understood. And among them, one stood apart. Dionysus. The last to claim a place among the Olympians. And perhaps the most dangerous of them all. Because he did not belong fully to the order of Olympus. Nor to the wild forces beyond it. He stood between both worlds. And in that place, he held a power unlike any other. His birth itself was a defiance of nature. A challenge to the rules even gods were meant to follow. He was the son of Zeus and Semele, a mortal woman. But mortal love does not go unnoticed in Olympus. Hera saw. And Hera acted. Disguised, she whispered doubt into Semele's heart. If Zeus truly loved her, she said, he would reveal his true form. And when Semele, unaware of the cost, made that request, Zeus could not refuse. Bound by his own promise, he revealed himself. And the result was instant. Terrible. The full radiance of a god is not meant for mortal eyes. Semele was consumed, burned to ash in a moment. Yet even in that destruction, Zeus reached into the flame. He saved the child. Unborn. Fragile. And in an act no god had ever done before, he sewed the child into his own thigh. There the infant grew. Hidden. Protected. Until the time came. And so Dionysus was born. Not once. But twice. A god who had died before he ever lived. A god who had come into the world through fire and flesh and defiance. From the beginning, his path was different. He was not raised in the halls of Olympus. Not surrounded by order and law. He grew instead in distant lands. Among nymphs and hidden groves. In places untouched by the rules of kings and cities. Some said he wandered as far as India. That he walked among satyrs and maenads, creatures of instinct and wild joy. His life was movement. Music. Celebration. He did not sit upon a throne. He walked the earth. And wherever he went, the world changed. Vines grew where there had been none. Grapes ripened overnight. Wine flowed like water. Laughter filled the air. But so did something else. Something deeper. Something more dangerous. Because Dionysus was not only the god of wine. He was the god of transformation. Of the moment when a man forgets himself. When reason slips away. When the line between control and chaos disappears. He brought joy. But also madness. He freed people from their burdens. But in doing so, he also freed their darkest impulses. And when that frenzy took hold, men and women alike could lose themselves completely. When he returned to Greece, he was not welcomed. The cities of men were built on order. On control. On rules that kept chaos at bay. And Dionysus threatened all of it. Kings rejected him. They mocked his rights. They refused to accept his power. And one by one, they paid the price. In Thebes, the land of his mother, his story reached its most terrible form. He came in disguise. Quiet. Watching. His followers gathering in the hills. Their voices rising in song. Their bodies moving in wild dance. A different kind of worship. One that did not bow, but surrendered. Pentheus, the king, saw only disorder. Madness. A threat to his rule. He had Dionysus arrested. Bound. Mocked. Refused to believe that this wandering figure could be a god. But chains do not hold something like Dionysus. He did not break them with strength. He broke them with the mind. With illusion. With desire. He drew Pentheus in. Spoke to him. Tempted him. Convinced him to see for himself what the women were doing in the hills. To witness the madness he feared. And so the king went. Disguised. Hidden among those he ruled. But what he found was not something he could control. The women were no longer themselves. They were lost in divine frenzy. Their minds taken. Their senses consumed. And among them was his own mother, Agave. When she saw him, she did not see her son. She saw prey. A beast. And in that madness, she led the others. They tore him apart. Limb from limb. A king reduced to nothing. Not by enemies. Not by war. But by his own blood. Only when the frenzy faded did the truth return. Agave stood with her son's head in her hands. And the horror of what she had done settled over her. A lesson carved in blood. One the city would never forget. Dionysus was not a god to be denied. Not a force to be controlled. He was something else entirely. Something that existed beyond order. Beyond reason. He was also the god of theater. Of masks. Of stories. Of the hidden truths that lie beneath the surface. In his festivals, men wore faces that were not their own. They spoke words they could not speak in life. They became something else. And through that, they revealed what was real. Comedy. Tragedy. Joy. Grief. All were offered in his name. Because Dionysus did not hide from the truth. He exposed it. He forced it into the open. In ways both beautiful and terrible. To worship him was not to stand at a distance. Not to offer a prayer and walk away. It was to give yourself over completely. To step beyond who you were. And accept whatever waited on the other side. And with him came something new to the world of the Greeks. The mystery cults. Secret rites. Hidden knowledge. Promises not of power, but of understanding. Of transformation. Of life beyond death. In these hidden gatherings, away from the eyes of kings and cities, people sought something more than the distant rule of Olympus. They sought meaning. In the Eleusinian mysteries, followers of Demeter and Persephone reenacted an older story. A story of loss and return. Of a daughter taken into darkness. And brought back again. It was a promise. That death was not the end. That something waited beyond. And in these quiet rites, the world began to change. Slowly. Silently. As new ideas took root beneath the shadow of old gods. The Orphics, those who followed the path of the wandering poet and mystic Orpheus, spoke in quieter tones than the priests of Olympus, but their words carried a different kind of weight. They did not speak only of gods who ruled the sky or sea, but of a deeper truth hidden beneath the surface of the world. In their telling, Dionysus was not just a bringer of wine and madness. He was a god who had suffered. A god who had been torn apart and yet returned. A god who knew death and had come back from it. And because of that, they believed he carried a knowledge the other gods did not. A knowledge born not of power, but of pain. To them, his story was not just myth. It was a promise. That suffering had meaning. That death was not an end, but a passage. That the soul could break free from the endless cycle of life and death and rise beyond it. These were not teachings meant for crowds or temples. They were secrets. Passed from one follower to another. Quiet. Hidden. But powerful. They did not deny the Olympians. They did not challenge Zeus or his rule. Instead, they moved beneath that order. Deeper. Softer. Offering something the great gods never had. Not command. Not fear. But hope. They spoke of a soul that did not fade when the body died. Of something within a person that could endure beyond flesh and bone. And in that idea, something began to change. The old world, built on sacrifice and obedience, began to tremble. Because if mortals carried something divine within themselves, then the distance between God and man was not as wide as it had once seemed. Even on Olympus, the signs of strain were growing. The gods, for all their power, were not at peace. Their rivalries deepened. Their conflicts grew sharper. Ares and Athena both claimed the hearts of warriors, one through rage and blood, the other through strategy and discipline. Apollo, bright and radiant, could bring healing and prophecy, but wherever he loved, sorrow followed. Hyacinthus was struck down by accident or fate. Daphne fled from him and was transformed into a tree. Caronus betrayed him and was consumed by his anger. Even the god of light left ruin behind him. Aphrodite, whose beauty could bend the will of gods and men alike, was no kinder. She stirred desire, but punished those who suffered from it. She could bring love, but also jealousy and destruction. And so, slowly, the gods began to mirror the world they ruled. They were no longer distant and untouchable. They became proud. Emotional. Wounded. Lost in their own desires and grudges. In Dionysus, that truth became impossible to ignore. He was both divine and something else entirely. A god who walked the earth like a wanderer. Who shared laughter with peasants and brought kings to ruin. Who offered joy and freedom, but also madness and loss. He did not fit within the order of Olympus. He challenged it simply by existing. And more than that, he changed what it meant to be divine. The gods were no longer just distant rulers in the sky. Through wine. Through music. Through ritual and frenzy, mortals could feel something greater within themselves. Not in temples. Not in statues. But inside their own breath. Their own heartbeat. It was a dangerous idea. Because it meant the line between God and man was not fixed. It could shift. It could blur. And once that thought took hold, it could not be undone. Far beyond the mountains of Greece, beyond the wine-dark sea and the marble cities, the world was already changing. New powers were rising. New gods would one day take the place of the old. Rome, still small and unseen, was beginning to grow. And though Olympus still stood, crowned in cloud and thunder, there were moments when even the gods could feel it. The quiet turning of the world. The wind shifting at the peak of the mountain. Yet the Olympians did not remain distant from the lives of men. Again and again, they descended from their high halls. Not always in glory. Not always in truth. They came in disguise. As lovers. As strangers. As forces of temptation or punishment. They walked among mortals and left behind more than stories. They left blood. Children born of both worlds. Neither fully god nor fully human. These children, the demigods, carried something dangerous within them. A spark of the divine trapped in mortal flesh. Some of them rose to greatness. Others fell into ruin. Many became something in between. But a few would leave behind names that echoed far longer than any temple or city. Among them, none stood greater than Heracles. The son of Zeus and Alcmene, a mortal queen of Thebes. Even his birth was shaped by deception. Zeus, as he so often did, took the form of another. He came to Alcmene as her husband and stretched the night itself, making it longer than any before. From that night, Heracles was born. And from the moment he entered the world, Hera's hatred followed him. She could not strike Zeus. So she struck what he loved. Even as an infant, Heracles was tested. Serpents were sent to his cradle, silent and deadly. But the child did not cry. He reached out with small hands and crushed them both. And from that moment, it was clear that his life would be unlike any other. He grew into strength beyond measure. But strength alone was never his story. It was suffering that shaped him. Because Hera did not relent. She waited. And when the time was right, she struck not at his body, but at his mind. In a madness sent by the gods, Heracles turned on his own home. He killed his wife, his children, the very family he had sworn to protect. And when the madness lifted, the truth stood before him. Blood, silence, loss. There are no words for such a moment. No escape. No forgiveness. Only the weight of what has been done. Broken by grief, he sought an answer. A way to cleanse what could not be undone. He went to the oracle at Delphi. And there he was given a path. Not of peace. Not of rest. But of labor. Of suffering. Of endurance. He would serve a lesser king, Eurystheus, and complete 12 tasks. Each one impossible. Each one a trial not just of strength, but of will. He faced the Nemean lion, whose skin no weapon could pierce, and strangled it with his bare hands. He fought the Hydra, whose heads multiplied when cut, and burned each wound to stop its return. He hunted beasts across mountains and forests. He cleaned filth no man could endure. He faced creatures born of nightmare and gods alike. He crossed the edges of the world. Walked paths no mortal should walk. And at last he descended into the underworld itself, and returned. Each labor was more than a victory. It was a step through suffering. A confrontation with death. With pain. With the limits of what a man can endure. And through all of it, Heracles changed. He was no longer just a hero. He became something else. A symbol. Of struggle. Of redemption. Of the idea that even the greatest sin can be faced, not erased, but carried. And at the end of his life, that suffering did not fade. It found him again. A poison robe, soaked in the blood of a dying centaur, burned into his flesh. No strength could save him. No weapon could fight it. And so, he made his final choice. He built his own funeral pyre, climbed upon it, and accepted the end. But for Heracles, death was not the end. The flames did not destroy him. They transformed him. The mortal part of him burned away. And what remained rose to Olympus. No longer just a man. No longer just a hero. But a god. The gods brought him to Olympus. And there, even Hera, who had once filled his life with suffering, at last accepted him. Not as a rival. Not as a mistake. But as one of their own. Heracles, once a mortal man, scarred by grief and burdened by guilt, became divine. The only mortal to take his place among the Olympians. A god not born in peace, but forged through pain. A being shaped not by ease, but by endurance. And in that, his story became something more than legend. It became proof that even the heaviest suffering could lead to something greater. Yet Heracles was not the first of such children. Nor would he be the last. Long before him, another son of Zeus had walked the world. Perseus. His story too began with fear. His mother, Danae, had been locked away in a tower of bronze. Not for any crime, but because of a prophecy. That her son would one day kill her father. And like all prophecies in Greek myth, it could not be escaped. It could not be bargained with. It could only unfold. Zeus did not come to her as a man. No door could open for him. No guard could be bribed. So he came as something else. As golden rain. Slipping through cracks no wall could seal. And from that union, Perseus was born. When the king discovered the child, fear ruled him. But he dared not spill their blood. Not directly. The gods watched such acts. And so he chose a quieter cruelty. Mother and child were placed in a wooden chest. Sealed. And cast into the sea. Left to the mercy of waves and chance. But fate had not finished its work. The chest did not sink. It drifted. Carried across the dark water until it reached the shore of a distant island. There, a fisherman found them. A simple man. Kind. He took them in. Raised the boy. And for a time, life was calm. But peace never lingers long in such stories. Another king. Another desire. Polyctes saw Danae and wanted her. And Perseus, now grown, stood in his way. So the king chose deception. He set the young man a task no one had ever survived. Bring me the head of Medusa. The Gorgon. The monster whose gaze turned men to stone. It was not a challenge. It was a death sentence. But Perseus did not walk that path alone. The gods watched. And some chose to help. Hermes gave him a blade. Sharp and swift. Athena gave him a shield. Polished like a mirror. And with that, he sought out the Gree. The old gray sisters who shared one eye between them. He took it, held it, and forced them to speak. They told him where to go, what he would need, the path to a place where death slept lightly. When he found Medusa, she lay among stone figures, the remains of those who had failed before him. He did not look at her. Not once. He watched her reflection in the shield, stepped carefully, slowly, and in a single moment he struck. Her head fell, and from her blood, something new was born. Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysor, a warrior of gold, life born from death, power rising from an ending. Perseus escaped, and on his journey home, his story grew larger. He saved Andromeda from a sea beast, claimed her as his wife, founded kingdoms, built a legacy that would stretch across generations. And from his bloodline in time would come Heracles. Their stories bound together, not just by deeds, but by fate. And Perseus was not alone. The world of myth was filled with such figures. Theseus, son of a king, or of Poseidon himself, depending on who told the tale. He walked the roads of Greece, clearing them of monsters, and entered the labyrinth of Crete to face the Minotaur, a creature half man, half beast, born of pride and punishment. With only a thread to guide him, he found the monster, and killed it, then found his way back to the light. Bellerophon rode Pegasus itself, a hero who slew the Chimera, a beast of fire and fury. But pride carried him too far. He tried to rise to Olympus itself, and for that he was cast down, broken, wandering, a reminder that even heroes must know their place. Atalanta, swift as the wind, raised by the wild, hunted like no man could. She outran all who sought her hand, until distraction, until desire, until even she was brought low. Such was the nature of the demigods. They were never meant for peace. Their blood carried too much power, too much conflict. They stood between two worlds, never fully belonging to either. The gods watched them with something like pride, and something like fear, because each one came close to crossing the line, to becoming more than they were meant to be, and mortals saw themselves in them, not in their strength, but in their struggle. They suffered, they failed, they endured, and because of that, they were remembered, not just as heroes, but as reflections of humanity itself, flawed, brave, doomed, and magnificent. As time passed, as wars ended and cities rose, their stories remained, carved into stone, sung in halls, whispered in quiet places. The gods stayed on Olympus, distant, watching, but it was in the lives of their children that the world found its meaning. Yet beyond gods, beyond heroes, beyond even the greatest of stories, there was something deeper still, something older than Zeus, older than the Titans, older than the sky itself. Fate. It was not a god, though the gods feared it. It was not a law, though it ruled all things. It was simply there, unseen, unbroken, unavoidable. The Greeks called it Mora, and sometimes they gave it form. Three sisters, silent, unyielding. Clotho, who spun the thread of life. Lachesis, who measured it. And Atropos, who cut it. And when she chose to cut, nothing could stop her. Not prayer, not power, not even Zeus himself. He might rage, he might command, but he could not change what had been woven. And so the question remained: if fate ruled all things, what power did man truly have? The answer lay not in changing fate, but in facing it. The Greeks did not believe they could escape what was written, but they believed they could understand it. Through signs, through omens, through the quiet voices of oracles, the future could be glimpsed, never avoided, but perhaps met with open eyes. And in that knowledge, in that fragile understanding, there was a kind of strength, not to change destiny, but to endure it. The most revered oracle in all of Greece stood at Delphi, high upon the slopes where stone met sky, where pilgrims climbed in silence and kings arrived in trembling anticipation. The voice of Apollo was said to speak, but it did not speak in thunder. It did not declare truths plainly. It came through the Pythia, a woman chosen to carry the god's breath. She sat upon a sacred tripod, placed above a deep chasm in the earth. From that opening, strange vapors rose, invisible, ancient. She breathed them in, and slowly, the world around her slipped away. Her eyes would cloud, her body would tremble, and in that state between waking and something beyond, the words would come. Not clear, not simple, but broken, fragmented, wrapped in riddles. Apollo did not give answers. He gave puzzles. And those who came seeking certainty often left with more questions than they had brought. Yet still they came. Kings, generals, farmers, men who wanted glory, men who feared death. All of them climbed the same path, offered gold, offered sacrifice, and asked, "Should I go to war? Should I trust this man? Will my son live?" The answers they received were never what they expected, and never what they could fully understand. One of the most famous tales tells of Croesus, a king rich beyond measure. He came to the oracle and asked if he should wage war against the Persians. The answer seemed clear. If you cross the river, you will destroy a great empire. It sounded like victory. It sounded like promise. But the oracle had not lied. When Croesus crossed the river, the empire that fell was his own. So it always was. The words were true. It was the meaning that slipped through human hands. Oedipus too stood before prophecy, told that he would kill his father and marry his mother. His parents tried to escape that fate. They cast him away, left him to die. He survived, grew, and when he heard the same prophecy, he fled from the people he believed were his parents, running from the truth. But every step he took only led him closer. A man at a crossroads. A moment of anger. A life ended. And the prophecy fulfilled. Not through choice, but through inevitability. The oracle had spoken. It was men who misunderstood. Delphi was not alone. Across the Greek world, voices of the divine could be found. At Dodona, the will of Zeus whispered through the leaves of sacred oaks. Priests listened to the rustling branches, to the movement of the wind, and heard meaning within it. On Delos, where Leto had given birth to Apollo and Artemis, the air itself seemed touched by something greater. In distant lands, even beyond Greece, shrines rose where dreams were read, where flames flickered in strange patterns, where birds turned in the sky and their flight was taken as a message. Everywhere signs were sought. In war, before swords were drawn, before ships left the shore, men watched the sky. A flash of lightning, a sudden storm, the cry of a bird at the wrong moment. These were not accidents. They were warnings. To ignore them was not just foolish, it was dangerous. Because to ignore a sign was to ignore the will of the gods. Sacrifices were made. Goats and oxen brought to the altar. Their bodies opened. Their entrails studied with careful eyes. Every mark, every line, every color, interpreted as a message. The art of reading these signs became a power of its own. Men who could read them, seers, held influence greater than many kings. Calchas guided the Greeks at Troy. Without him, they would not have known when to sail, when to strike, when to wait. Tiresias, blind yet all-seeing, spoke truths no one wished to hear. He had lived through generations, seen more than any man should, and those who asked him for answers often regretted it. Because knowledge is not always a gift. Sometimes it is a burden. Sometimes it is a curse. But these practices were not simple superstition. They came from something deeper. A belief woven into the heart of Greek thought. That mortals were not masters of their own lives. No matter how strong a hero, no matter how wise a king, no matter how pure a heart, fate moved beneath all things. Quiet, constant, unstoppable. And in the end, it would break them all. To see the future was not to change it. It was only to understand what was already coming. And that understanding often arrived too late. Yet still they sought it. They climbed the long roads to Delphi. They offered gold, blood, prayers. They asked their questions in hushed voices. Because even if the future could not be changed, it could be faced. To know the storm was coming did not stop the rain. But perhaps it allowed a man to stand firm when it arrived. In that fragile space between knowledge and helplessness, between what is known and what is feared, the Greeks found their meaning. Their stories were not about defeating destiny. They were about meeting it with dignity. Hector knew he would fall, yet he still lifted his spear. Achilles knew he would never return, yet he still sailed to Troy. Oedipus tried to run from his fate, and ran straight into it. And still the Pythia breathed in the rising vapors. Still she spoke in riddles, her voice carrying the quiet certainty of a world that had already been decided. To the Greeks, death was not an end. It was not a final judgment. It was simply the moment when breath left the body. What came after was something older, something deeper, a realm beneath the earth, where all souls traveled, kings and beggars, heroes and cowards, all walked the same path, into the dark, into the place where stories did not end, but changed. This place was Hades, a realm named not just for the land itself, but for the god who ruled it. Yet it was not a place of fire and torment as later ages would imagine. There were no flames rising from endless pits. No horned demons waiting in shadow. And still, it inspired a fear deeper than any nightmare. A quiet dread. A certainty that once crossed, no living soul could return unchanged. Mortals rarely spoke the name of its ruler aloud. It was safer to call him Platon, the wealthy one. For all riches came from beneath the earth. Gold, silver, hidden veins of treasure buried in stone. And so too did the dead. The underworld was not shaped by reason. It was shaped by memory. By stories passed from one voice to another. Its paths were not measured in distance, but in meaning. At its edge flowed the rivers that marked the boundary between life and what came after. The Styx, dark and sacred. The river of oaths. Even the gods swore upon it. And if they broke that oath, they would fall into silence for years. A punishment feared even on Olympus. The Acheron, the river of sorrow, where grief clung to the water like mist. The Phlegethon, a river of fire, burning without light. The Cocytus, the river of lamentation, filled with endless cries. And the Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, where memory itself could be washed away. These were not just waters. They were thresholds. Each one a step further from the world of the living. The dead did not arrive as bodies. They came as shades. Thin, fading, breathless, stripped of weight and warmth. They were called the psyches. Souls without voice, without strength. Echoes of who they had once been. To cross into Hades, they needed a guide. Charon, the ferryman. Old, silent, patient. For a coin, placed upon the tongue or the eyes of the dead, he would carry them across the Acheron. But those who were not buried, those who had no coin, were left behind, wandering the shores for 100 years, calling out with voices no one could hear, weeping for a passage they could not take. At the gates waited Cerberus, the great hound. 3 heads. Endless vigilance. He did not hunt the living. He guarded the boundary. He made sure the dead stayed within, and that the living did not pass through lightly. Beyond him stretched the underworld itself. Vast, silent, gray. The fields of asphodel lay wide and endless. There, most souls drifted. Not in pain, not in joy, but in forgetting. Their lives faded. Their names slipped away. They became shadows among shadows, murmuring like wind through dry grass. But not all souls shared the same fate. Deeper within, judgment waited. Minos, Rhadamanthus, Aeacus, kings in life, judges in death. They weighed each soul, not by wealth, not by birth, but by the truth of their deeds. The wicked were sent downward, into Tartarus, a place deeper than the deepest pit, where even the Titans had once been chained. There, punishment was not random. It was precise. Each torment shaped to mirror the crime. Sisyphus pushed his stone forever, watching it roll back each time he neared the summit. Tantalus stood in water he could never drink, beneath fruit he could never reach. Ixion turned upon a wheel of fire, endlessly, without rest. These were not punishments meant to end. They were meant to continue, to reflect the choices that had defined their lives. Yet there was another path, rare, but not forgotten. The Elysian Fields, a place of light, of gentle winds and endless spring, where heroes and the blessed walked in peace, their memories intact, their suffering behind them. There, life did not end. It softened. It continued in quiet joy. And for a few, a very few, there was a choice. To return, to drink from Lethe, to forget all that had been, and to be born again. A new life, a new path. The cycle beginning once more. In later beliefs, some hoped to escape even that, to rise beyond the cycle, to become something more than mortal. But such hopes were uncertain, whispers more than promises. At the center of it all stood Hades himself. Not cruel, not wrathful, but absolute. He did not seek worship. He did not chase power. He did not leave his realm. He ruled. Quietly. Completely. His kingdom did not change. And he wished it to remain so. He was not evil. He was necessary. The stillness that followed life. The shadow that balanced the light of Zeus and the storms of Poseidon. And beside him stood Persephone, queen of the underworld. Her story carried both darkness and renewal. She was the daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest. One day, as she gathered flowers in a field, the earth opened, and Hades rose. Swift, unseen, he took her into the depths. Demeter searched. Across the world. Through field and forest. But she could not find her child. And in her grief, she let the earth die. Crops failed. The soil hardened. Rivers slowed. Hunger spread across the land. No prayer could move her. No god could change her will. Life itself began to fade. At last Zeus intervened. Hermes was sent to bring Persephone back. But the underworld does not release its own so easily. Persephone had eaten from its fruit. Pomegranate seeds. A simple act, but binding. Because of that, she could not fully leave. And so a balance was made. Part of the year she would remain below. And in those months, Demeter would grieve. The world would grow cold. The fields would fall silent. Winter would come. And when Persephone returned, the earth would bloom again. Spring would follow. Life would rise. Death and life became one cycle. Not an ending, but a turning. Over time, Persephone changed. She was no longer just a captive. She became a queen. A ruler in her own right. Walking among the shades with calm authority. In the sacred mysteries of Eleusis, her story was retold each year. Not as a tale of loss, but as a promise. That what descends can return. That death is not the final word. The underworld was not sealed completely. A few mortals found their way there. And returned. But none came back the same. Orpheus descended into the underworld not with a sword. Not with strength. But with song. His music moved through the darkness like light through water. Even Cerberus, the great hound, lowered his heads and let him pass. The shades gathered. Silent. Listening. And when he stood before Hades and Persephone, he did not demand. He did not beg with words. He sang. Of love. Of loss. Of a world that could not go on without the one he had lost. Eurydice. And for a moment, even the rulers of the dead were moved. They gave him a chance. A single condition. Walk ahead. Do not turn back. Not until you reach the world above. She would follow. He walked. Through shadow. Through silence. Through doubt. And just before the light touched him, just before the world returned, he turned. And in that single glance, she was gone. Lost again. Not to be returned. Heracles came not for love, but for trial. One of his labors led him into Hades. Not to steal. Not to plead. But to bring back Cerberus itself. The guardian of the dead. And he did what no mortal should. He faced the beast. Wrestled it. And dragged it into the light. Proof that even the underworld could be touched. Though never without cost. Odysseus did not walk among the dead. He called to them. Guided by Circe, he journeyed to the edge of the world. There he dug a pit. Offered blood. And the shades came. Drawn to it. Hungry for memory. For voice. For a moment of being alive again. Tiresias spoke to him. Gave him knowledge. Of the path ahead. Of the dangers waiting. Achilles came too. Once the greatest of warriors. Once the brightest of heroes. And when Odysseus praised him, spoke of his glory, Achilles answered with a truth that cut deeper than any blade. Better to be a slave among the living, than a king among the dead. In that moment, all the songs of glory fell silent. Because death was not victory, not honor, only ending. And so the Greeks treated death with care, with ritual, with respect. They buried their dead with coins, for Sharon, with weapons, with wine, with the things a soul might need. They poured libations at the hearth, spoke to the ones who had gone, because the dead were never fully gone. They lingered, in dreams, in silence, in quiet moments. And sometimes, through ritual and sacrifice, they could be called back. For answers, for warnings, for truths better left untouched. The underworld was not a place of reward or punishment alone. It was a mirror, of life, of memory, of justice that could not be escaped. It offered no heaven for the faithful, no fire for the faithless. It simply was. Vast, silent, endless, ruled by a God who asked for nothing. Not love, not prayer, only stillness. And in that stillness, the Greeks saw something eternal. Death was not an enemy. It was a passage, a step in the order of the world, as natural as the turning of the seasons, as certain as the setting sun. But even the gods, for all their power, were not eternal in the way men believed. Not in memory, not in worship, not in the hearts of those who told their stories. There comes a time in every age, when the old voices grow quiet, when the figures that once stood bright begin to fade. And for the gods of Olympus, that time did not come through war, or prophecy. It came through change, through a new world rising beyond the hills of Greece, Rome, The Romans did not destroy the Greek gods. They did something more subtle, more lasting. They adopted them, renamed them, reshaped them. Zeus became Jupiter. Hera became Juno. Poseidon became Neptune. The same gods, and yet not the same. Their stories remained, but their meaning shifted. Rome admired the grandeur of Olympus, but it valued order, authority, empire. Jupiter was no longer just a storm god. He became a symbol of law, of rule, of the state itself. Dionysus became Bacchus. His wildness softened, his madness made into celebration. Athena became Minerva. Her wisdom turned towards civic life, toward governance, toward structure. The gods did not vanish, but they changed. They became reflections of a different world. In poetry, they lived on. Ovid retold their stories, filled them with transformation, with beauty, with irony. Virgil placed them behind the rise of Rome itself, guiding fate, shaping destiny. But something had shifted. In the old tales, the gods walked beside men. They fought, loved, bled. They were present. In Rome, they became distant. Symbols, ideas, forces behind the world, not within it. And as the empire grew, new beliefs arrived. New gods, new ideas. From the east came Mithras, a god of mystery, of sacrifice, of hidden rites. From Egypt came Isis, a goddess of magic, of motherhood, of rebirth. Her worship spread quietly, deeply. From Judea came something different entirely. One God, invisible, unseen, without form, without image. A God who did not share power, who did not dwell among others, who demanded devotion alone. These beliefs did not simply add to the old world. They challenged it. Because where the Olympians ruled through power, through hierarchy, through desire, these new faiths offered something else. Meaning, salvation, a promise beyond death. At the same time, thought itself began to change. Philosophers questioned what had once been accepted. Xenophanes mocked the old stories. He said if animals could draw their gods, they would look like themselves. Plato saw beauty in myth, but he questioned its truth. He imagined gods who were perfect, not jealous, not cruel, not driven by passion. Epicurus went further. He said the gods existed, but they did not care. They did not interfere. And fear of them was nothing more than illusion. Slowly, quietly, the old world began to shift. Not through force, but through thought, through belief, through time itself. And the gods of Olympus, once so close, once so present, began to fade into story. Even Stoicism, with its quiet discipline and unyielding sense of order, did not look to the gods as figures sitting upon thrones. It saw divinity in reason itself, in the logos, the hidden law that governed everything, a force that moved through all things, unseen yet constant. To live well was not to please the gods with offerings, but to align oneself with that greater order, to accept what could not be changed and master what could. And so even as temples stood and sacrifices were made, belief itself was already beginning to change. By the time the imperial cult rose, when emperors were declared divine and altars were raised not to ancient gods but to mortal rulers, the line between myth and power had begun to blur. The gods of old did not disappear, but they shifted. They became symbols, traditions, names carried forward more out of habit than conviction. Farmers still left offerings to Demeter. Sailors still whispered prayers to Poseidon before a journey. But fewer truly believed that these gods walked among them. The flame on Olympus had not yet gone out, but it no longer burned as it once had. It flickered, unsteady, waiting. And then came a change unlike any before. Not a rival god, not a new myth, but a different way of seeing the world. Christianity began as something small, a quiet movement, a belief carried by those with little power. It spread not through conquest but through words, through faith, through the promise of something beyond suffering. Its God was not one among many. He was one, invisible, all-powerful, without form, without equal. And its stories were not of rivalries and passions among divine beings. They were of sin, of redemption, of salvation, of a single path. Slowly, steadily it grew. Temples that once belonged to the old gods fell silent. Hymns changed. Voices shifted. Priests who once tended sacred fires now spoke against the Olympians. Called them false. Called them demons. Or relics of a past that had no place in the present. By the time of Emperor Theodosius I, the change was complete in law if not yet in memory. Pagan temples were closed. The Olympic Games ended. The rituals of sacrifice forbidden. There was no great war in the heavens. No final battle between Zeus and a new god. No storm of thunder against the rising cross. The Olympians did not fall in fire. They faded. Quietly. Like the last light of evening slipping beneath the horizon. Their statues remained. Cold. Silent. Watching over empty halls. Their altars gathered dust. The marble cracked. Vines crept across the stones where prayers had once been spoken. And yet they did not vanish completely. The myths remained. Not as belief, but as story. Children learned of Heracles not as a figure to worship, but as a hero to remember. Artists painted Athena not as a goddess to pray to, but as a symbol of wisdom. The gods who had once shaped storms and guided fate became something else. Beautiful. Distant. Haunting. And in that transformation, they found a different kind of immortality. Because even as temples fell, the stories endured. They lingered in quiet places. In whispered lines of poetry. In the imagination of those who refused to let them disappear entirely. During the long centuries that followed, when Christianity shaped the world, the old gods were no longer worshipped. But they were not erased. Monks and scholars copied ancient texts. Sometimes reluctantly. Sometimes with care. Preserving the works of Homer and Hesiod. Of Euripides and Sophocles. Even as they rejected the beliefs those works once carried. The stories waited. Hidden. Patient. And then the world turned again. The Renaissance came. A rebirth not of faith, but of memory. In the cities of Italy, in Florence and Rome, thinkers and artists looked back to the ancient world. Not to worship it, but to understand it. To draw from it. Painters brought Aphrodite back from the sea. Not as a goddess, but as an image of beauty itself. Sculptors shaped Apollo in marble. Perfect. Still. Poets called upon the muses once more. Not because they believed they would answer, but because the language of myth still held power. The gods did not return to their temples. But they returned to art. To thought. To the human mind. And in that space, they lived again. The Enlightenment followed. A time of reason. Of questioning. Of breaking apart old beliefs. And yet even there, the myths endured. Scholars studied them. Translated them. Looked for meaning beneath their stories. Some saw allegory. Others saw reflections of human nature. Goethe found in them the shape of the soul. Others found warnings. Lessons. Patterns that repeated across time. Then came Romanticism. And with it, a return to emotion. To tragedy. To the deep questions that logic alone could not answer. Writers turned again to figures like Oedipus. Like Antigone. Like Orpheus. And asked the same questions the Greeks had once asked. What is fate? What is love? What does it mean to suffer? What does it mean to be human? And then the modern world arrived. Faster. Louder. More uncertain than any age before it. And still the myths remained. Not bound to temples. Not tied to belief. But alive in stories. In books. In films. In the quiet imagination of those who still looked back and saw something familiar in those ancient gods. Because they were never just gods. They were reflections. Of fear. Of hope. Of pride. Of loss. Of everything that it means to be human. And as long as those things remain. As long as people wonder. As long as they dream. The gods of Olympus will never truly disappear. It did not end when the temples fell. The stories changed shape. They moved into new worlds. New voices. New minds. Myths slipped quietly into literature. Into cinema. Into the hidden language of psychology. Even into comics and modern tales. Carl Jung looked at the old gods and did not see distant beings. He saw reflections of the human mind. Archetypes that return again and again in different forms. Patterns that never truly fade. James Joyce carried those ancient echoes into the streets of Dublin, turning ordinary lives into journeys shaped by myth. Rick Riordan brought the gods into the present. Into schools. Into cities. Into the lives of children who would meet them not on Mount Olympus but in Manhattan. And in the worlds of Marvel and DC, the gods walked again. Not in robes and sandals, but in armor. In color. In new legends shaped for a different age. Yet behind all of these new faces, the old stories remained unchanged. Odysseus still sailed across restless seas. Heracles still labored beneath the weight of impossible trials. Persephone still rose from the underworld each spring. The myths were never erased. They were carried forward, translated from one generation to the next, given new voices, new meanings, new life. Because myth is not something fixed in stone. It is living memory, shaped by those who remember it. What the Greeks gave the world was more than a collection of stories. They offered a way to understand existence, a way to face death, to question fate, to admire beauty, to confront the unknown within ourselves. Their gods were not perfect. They were flawed, emotional, contradictory. And that is why they endure. In them we do not see something distant. We see ourselves, our fears, our desires, our pride, our mistakes. They show us what we might become, and what we must be careful of becoming. Even now, in a world guided by science, in a world that often feels quiet and rational, the myths still whisper. You can hear them in stories of chosen heroes, in tales of rise and fall, in the turning of seasons. A daughter descends and the world grows cold. A king tries to escape his fate and runs directly into it. A mother grieves and the earth answers. The faces change. The settings change. But the truths beneath them remain the same. The gods may no longer sit upon Olympus, but they have never truly left. They walk softly now, in stories, in music, in dreams, in the quiet places of the mind, in every tale that reaches beyond the limits of the ordinary. They are not gone. They have only moved. And now, the story comes to an end. The winds on Olympus have grown still. The fires in Delphi have turned to ash. The voices have faded into silence. But the myths remain, waiting, listening, ready to rise again whenever someone chooses to remember. Good night.